Welcome to Rapa Nui, better known as Easter Island. It's a tiny speck in the vast Pacific Ocean, 2,200 miles away from the coast of Chile. This island is most famous for its eerie moai statues. This place is also home to one of the most mysterious writing systems in the world, called Ronga Ronga. We found it on 27 small wooden tablets. For years, historians have been arguing about the true history of these tablets, and now we might have found the truth. Humans first set foot on this island in the 12th century. For many years, it was home to the Rapa Nui people. They were pretty isolated out there in the Pacific Ocean until Europeans arrived in the 1720s. Europeans brought with them lots of troubles, leaving only a small fraction of the native population alive. Later in the 19th century, a missionary, Eugene Iro, went to the island and discovered the wooden tablets with intricate symbols carved on them. He wrote how marvelous they are, but there are hundreds of them on the island, and that they can be found in every household. But unfortunately, not all of them survive to this day. We've only got 27 of them. Some of them were heavily weathered, burned, or otherwise damaged, and now they're scattered all over the world in museums and private collections. Some of the language's artifacts were carted off to Tahiti and then to Europe by Europeans, leaving none behind on Easter Island itself. The four sacred tablets found their home in a congregation in Rome. They were the ones used in the recent discovery. For years, historians have been arguing whether this writing system was made up by the islanders themselves or they borrowed it from Europeans. To find the truth, they decided to use a technique called radiocarbon dating. All organic materials, like wood, charcoal, and so on, contain a tiny amount of a radioactive form of carbon called carbon-14. When life comes to an end, things stop taking in carbon-14, and the amount they had starts to decay over time. By measuring how much carbon-14 is left in a sample, we can assume how old this sample is. This is how we learn the age of many fossils and artifacts. So, they looked at the age of some Ronga Ronga tablets. 3 of them were crafted from trees grown in the 18th or 19th century, which aligns with the arrival of Europeans. However, one of them is older than the Europeans' first visit to the island. There are 2 reasons to believe that Rapa Nui people created this writing system themselves. First, Ronga Ronga works differently from European languages. Decoding it is a pretty hard task. Unlike English, this language boasts over 400 unique glyphs, none of which resemble any known writing system. There were many attempts to decipher this language, and none of them were successful so far. And second, one of the tablets is shown to be from around the 15th century, before the Europeans arrived. The problem is that radiocarbon dating can only tell us when the wood the tablet was made from was cut down, not when the writing was put on it. And since we've only got one tablet to go by, this isn't enough to be completely sure. On the other hand, why and where would they preserve cut wood for over 200 years just to grab it and write something on it one day? But anthropologists and historians say that it's possible. Scarce wood resources might have led the islanders to reuse old driftwood, which could be centuries older than the writing itself. This is known as the old wood problem in archaeology. Plus, the tablet looks very preserved. It was maintained to protect it from wood-damaging insects, humidity, and so on. That's why it survived over the centuries. Whatever is written on it, it was probably important for the Rapa Nui people. Now, all of these are guesses and clues, but scientists are cautiously optimistic. They believe that Ronga Ronga could be one of the rare instances of independent writing invention, like those of the Sumerians or the Egyptians. But we need more evidence. In the Rapa Nui language, rogo rogo means to recite or to declaim. Not everyone could write, only a select few. Probably only the elite of Easter Island, mostly men, knew and could read this written language. After colonization, none of them survived. So now we have to rack our brains trying to figure out what's written here. First, scholars can't agree on what type of script it is. We aren't even sure that this was their language. But even if it was, we don't know whether it's a primitive form of writing or a fully developed system. In the 1990s, a linguist, Stephen Roger Fisher, believed he might have cracked the code of Ronga Ronga structure. His idea was that these tablets conveyed cosmogonies. Cosmogonies are stories or narratives that explain how the universe was created and how natural phenomena came to be. They often come from ancient traditions and cultures, like those found in East Polynesia. The tablets could have talked about things like how the world began, where everything came from, and how different aspects of nature, like the stars or the mountains, were formed. This would also explain why only the wise elite could write. Fisher thought that Ranga is a mix of logographic and semasiographic systems, which means that some symbols represent spoken words, while others represent ideas or concepts. But deciphering them would be very hard because it requires extensive memory and knowing context, because the symbols are more like hints than complete expressions. However, other language experts disagreed with his ideas, saying there were problems with how he put together his theory. Unfortunately, Fisher couldn't prove this hypothesis. Maybe these are just drawings. If we look at the tablets, there are some things that look recognizable: people, animals, plants, and geometric shapes. There are some birds. One of them looks like a frigate bird, which Rapa Nui people associate with the deity Maki Maki. There are also fish, centipedes, and so on, or at least these glyphs look like them. Could it be just art or a form of decoration? Maybe, but there are some problems. The glyphs show a high degree of complexity and structure. They also keep the same style. For example, there are several symbols that show something human-like with a raised hand. The only difference is different heads. As if it wasn't complicated enough, this unique writing style also uses a system known as reverse boustrophodon. This means that each alternate line is flipped upside down, resembling nothing seen elsewhere. We don't know why they would turn the tablet upside down after each line. But all this shows that they had some sort of system and organization behind these symbols. Plus, it seems like they use these tablets every day for some practical purpose. But there's some hope for the future. New technology, like AI and other computer programs, might help us understand lost languages. We already started creating algorithms that could help us solve other mysteries, like the Voynich manuscript. Academics even organized the Vesuvius Challenge, a machine learning competition that, in 2023, cracked the riddle of the ancient Herculaneum scrolls. The scrolls were buried under volcanic mud after the catastrophic eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. In real life, the scrolls are very fragile, so deciphering them would be a very hard task. But with digital scanning and machine learning, it's much easier. They have a rich history. They most likely belong to the personal library of an Epicurean philosopher named Philodemus. These scrolls contain very important insights into Greek philosophy and Latin literature. If we decipher more of them, we'll learn more about the rich history of the Roman Empire.
Strange and amazing items are discovered often, but figuring out what our ancestors were up to is pretty tough. Especially when all you have are just some rusty cups and cave drawings. It's no surprise that even the experts in lab coats sometimes make mistakes. But it's not just about dusty plates and huge stones. Sometimes there's even humans with large heads. So grab your digging tools and let's travel back to ancient times to explore incredible societies that even scientists can't fully explain. Sardinia may look idyllic now, but I'm not gonna lie, I wouldn't fancy visiting it 3,000 years ago. Rumor has it, terrible giants roamed around this island back then. People even talk about finding human skeletons over 13 feet tall there, although nobody's ever shown anything to prove it. But the stories will make you wonder because some weird stuff has definitely happened. In 1974, over 5,000 pieces of broken stone artifacts were found in a part of the island called Monte Prama, but instead of being displayed in a museum, they were locked up in an underground vault for about 30 years. Sounds a bit suspicious, doesn't it? When they were finally displaced in 2005, scientists put the pieces together to find statues of 38 giant men standing 8 feet tall. Not quite as tall as the legendary skeletons, but still pretty huge. It's thought these statues were made by the Nuragic people, who lived on the island a long time ago. Besides giant statues, they also built over 8,000 massive stone buildings. Perhaps Nuragic weren't giants themselves, but they definitely liked their things big. I do too. I like a big number of likes on our videos. That'd be pretty great. Thank you if you liked this and subscribed. Now back to the video. You and I are pretty smart, but we might not be the smartest humans ever. Actually, we might not even be the smartest species. Since 1913, some skull fossils found in South Africa have hinted at a possibly smarter contender called Boskop Man. This human-like species might have lived as recently as 10,000 years ago. Their skull suggests they had really big heads, which means their brains could have been 30% bigger than ours. Wow! Their average IQ could have been around 149, making them among the smartest 0.05% of people today. But if a Boskop Brainiac was so much smarter, why are they not around and we are? Well, bigger isn't always better, you know. Our brains are a lot bigger than our ape relatives, mainly in the prefrontal cortex. This part helps with high-level tasks like making decisions, remembering things short-term, and being aware of ourselves. The parts of the brain that handle our senses and movements haven't really grown much. So, maybe the Boskops spent too much time dwelling on the past rather than doing practical things like hunting. But this is all just guessing. We really don't know what happened to these clever cousins of ours. Some people even argue that Boskops weren't any different from us, with the only evidence being parts of skulls. The jungle is huge. Did you know the Amazon rainforest is home to about 30% of all the world's plant and animal species? That's impressive. However, the history of one native species, humans, has long puzzled scientists. The mysterious Kasarabe people lived here for hundreds of years and then vanished around 1400 AD. People thought the Amazon only had a few scattered tribes, but recently we discovered big, unusual shapes in the ground called geoglyphs. These might look like simple shallow ditches, but they're actually the remains of a vast civilization that spread over 5,000 square miles and includes about 450 markings, some as wide as 1,300 feet. That's insane! They likely contained ceremonial buildings and could have hosted up to 1 million people as recently as 550 years ago. Thanks to new technology like LiDAR, which uses a safe laser to map the forest without harming it, we can explore deeper. In 2019, some scans showed miles of raised roads and pathways and even pyramids over 70 feet tall. They found 26 separate settlements, 2 of which were at least 250 acres each. Damn, that's like 330 soccer fields. It's not certain what happened to the Kasarabe people. Maybe European conquistadors drove them out. Maybe the most baffling ancient civilization is one we've never actually found a trace of. Yep, I'm talking about Atlantis, the grand city that supposedly sank into the ocean. The first mentions of Atlantis come from the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, who talked about a great city near the Strait of Gibraltar. But for ages, everyone just thought Plato made up Atlantis as a perfect version of his own Athens. So why, about 12,000 years after it supposedly vanished, do we still wonder if it might be real? Well, in the 19th century, U.S. Congressman Ignatius Donnelly wrote a book giving 13 reasons why he thought Atlantis was more than just a myth. Then, in 1965, some folks thought they actually found Atlantis when they discovered the Richat structure, a massive 25-mile-wide dome in Mauritania, Africa. It's so big that you can see the whole thing from space. 2 astronauts flying over the Sahara Desert spotted this giant eye staring back at them and thought they'd made the discovery of a lifetime. Unfortunately, there's no solid evidence linking this structure to Atlantis. It's believed to have formed from volcanic activity about 100 million years ago. But it does look suspicious, doesn't it? Still, we're no closer to knowing the truth. Imagine going back to about 3,300 BCE and finding yourself in South Asia. Welcome to the Harappan civilization. These people were way ahead of their time. They had cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, complete with baked brick houses, sophisticated drainage systems, and even public baths. This place might have had over 5 million people, making it one of the densest regions at the time. They also invented a system of standardized weights that was incredibly useful for traders. And trading they did. These people had connections stretching all the way to the Middle East, thanks to their great skills in metallurgy. They even had a form of ancient branding. The seals were used to stamp clay on trade goods. Despite being so advanced with a thriving urban life, there's a whole bunch of mystery shrouding their language and script. We've got bits and pieces of their writing, but no one's deciphered them yet, even with all the technology we have today. We also still don't know how exactly their society worked. It looks like they didn't flaunt their social status as much as other civilizations. No grand palaces or massive monuments. Instead, their largest buildings might have been granaries. They sure were practical. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. Around 1800 BCE, this bustling civilization started to decline, possibly due to shifts in river patterns. As the environment changed, the Harappans packed up, moving towards more hospitable lands. Ever heard of the Minotaur? The beast with a bull's head and a man's body, hunting the bravest travelers in a massive maze. Well, this wasn't just any old tale. It was one of the most popular dramas of the ancient world, and it was inspired by this place, the island of Crete. The Minoans lived here during the Bronze Age. They had stunning palaces, amazing frescoes, and a culture so rich it still fascinates historians to this day. They built places like Knossos, which was so complex with its multi-story buildings and elaborate hallways that it might have inspired the whole labyrinth myth. Their engineering was so ahead of its time that even their drainage systems were more advanced than what many of us have today. Let me know in the comments which of these stories you find the most fascinating, and thanks for watching.
Behind those huge steel doors is one of the most guarded places on Earth. It's known as Site R, or the Raven Rock Mountain Complex. You'll find it in Pennsylvania. The construction is 60 stories underground and is said to be a safe place for people in case of a natural or human-made disaster. There's not a lot of information online about this mysterious place, but what we do know is that it's equipped with 38 communication systems. It's obviously not available for visits via Google Earth, but you can catch a quick glance at the 2 gates that face the complex. Vatican City is one of the most famous enclaves on Earth, and it's certainly worth a visit due to its wonderful architecture and vast list of art pieces to check out. One place, however, will always be off limits for visitors: the Vatican's secret archives. They have some of the oldest and rarest books on Earth. These archives are available only to a limited number of people, and since they have been visited by a small number of people so far, they also trigger a lot of weird theories. For example, that there may be books proving there's life outside our planet. If you're fascinated by shipwrecks, you'll be interested to know that one of the largest wrecks you can see on Google Earth is on North Sentinel Island, India. It used to be called the SS Jassim. It was a Bolivian ferry that sank in the area back in 2003. The reason why people can't visit it physically isn't because of the ship itself, but because the island is home to the world's most dangerous tribe. We don't really know how many people live there, but it was estimated that between 50 to 400 people call this place home. And they really don't like tourists. No person that tried to reach them survived. Also, to protect them, their privacy, and their special status, the island is closely monitored by the Indian authorities. That's mostly because it's believed the locals don't have any immunity to modern diseases. So being in contact with foreigners might be dangerous for the tribe's people, since they've never seen the outer world. A huge pink bunny appeared seemingly out of nowhere in the Italian Coleto Fava Mountains back in 2005. Besides the locals, some people stumbled upon it online too. They were puzzled by the discovery. Unfortunately, that 200-foot-tall bunny is completely gone today. You can still find the images of it online though. The unusual object was designed by artists from Vienna. They encouraged tourists to climb, jump, or even take a nap on top of the large rabbit. The whole purpose of the project was to allow people to experience what it would be like to live as smaller creatures. The bunny didn't have any removal date at the time it was placed there and was expected to last at least until 2025. But Mother Nature had other plans. A Japanese artist decided to move back to her little home village named Nagoro. But she soon found out that most of her neighbors were moving to bigger cities. To deal with loneliness, she started putting together scarecrow-like dolls, or kakashi, and placing them all over her garden. She didn't stop there, though. The artist soon began doing the same with many other places in her village, creating dolls and placing them as if they were taking part in various human activities. These dolls keep moving around too, but the woman likes to stay true to her story and insists she doesn't touch them. You can see the images of this quirky village on Google Maps. This weird portal was discovered via online maps in New Baltimore, New York. It gave people all sorts of bad dreams. With spooky-looking buildings and all sorts of blurry figures, this area soon became a source for many weird internet theories. Turns out it was nothing more than a technical issue, which resulted in those images being rendered in a distorted manner. Either way, if you look for these images on Google, you won't be able to unsee them. This cute miniature world map was created by an artist from Denmark. He continuously worked on this tedious project from 1944 until 1967, using mostly his hands and just a few tools for moving heavy rocks around. He gathered stones at the edge of the water, then recreated the map of the world on the surface of this lake. During the winter, he was able to use a sled to transport larger pieces of rock over the ice and then place them in the perfect position. Apart from the continents themselves, the map also features rivers and lakes, as well as some other famous landmarks. Care to have a look at a sea without any coasts? Search for the Sargasso Sea. You'll find it in the northern Atlantic Ocean. This weird sea is surrounded by 4 ocean currents and no dry land at all. It got its name from the seaweed that grows there, sargassum. Fingerprints on the lens of a satellite camera? You may be tricked into thinking this if you search for the Finger Maze. It's located in the city of Brighton, UK, and is a large fingerprint created in Hove Park. It also has a maze at the center. It can be really hard and time-consuming to look for wild animals on Google Earth, but the Geo browser does have a nice feature that can help if you're eager to see hippos and flamingos in their natural habitat. Try Googling animals from above and start scrolling through these images. This unique feature can take you from Kenya to Namibia and even all the way to Antarctica, where you can see emperor penguins. There are some places on Google Maps that, for specific reasons, aren't available for the online public, like the Royal Palace in Amsterdam. If you head over there via Google Earth, you'll see that everything around the Dutch Royal Palace is still visible, like the vegetation and roads, but the construction itself is blurred from all angles. That's probably because local authorities want to keep the unique views of the palace for the eyes of physical visitors only. The same goes for the Tantaco National Park in Chile. This one is a privately owned nature reserve that can only be seen on Google Maps from a distance. Once you reach a certain point, the zoom feature stops working. Some people say that since it's a nature preserve, it may be home to some endangered species, and extreme measures are taken for their protection. You know how a certain brand of fried chicken has a certain kernel on their logo? Yeah, you won't see any of these logos in high resolution on Google Maps. That's because the online map uses specific algorithms to detect people's faces and blur them out. As you can see, it's not always really that accurate. It's called Snake Island, and the Brazilian authorities prohibit people from visiting it. For good reason. You'll find the island near the city of Sao Paulo in Brazil. It's said to be home to over 4,000 snakes. Some of the most venomous types of reptiles on Earth call this place home. If that's not creepy enough, how about that some of them are so dangerous that a small drop of their venom can permanently damage the human skin? You can see the shape of the island on Google Earth, but the more you zoom in, the blurrier it becomes. Here's another cool thing you can do on Google Earth: time travel. Well, at least sort of. You won't be able to travel back in time and tell yourself to study more for that tricky exam, but you can see certain historical images of places you like. You can check if this feature works by looking at the upper left corner of the screen. If you can see a small icon with a clock, it may allow you to scroll some years back. But you can also see how sunlight affects Earth if you turn on the sunlight feature.
If someone finally invents time travel and you hop on a trip to the past, you won't recognize many of the things you know and love today. The Statue of Liberty and the Egyptian pyramids, some basic gadgets like the remote control and your laptop, and even the corn you have for lunch have all changed beyond recognition. When the pyramids were originally built in ancient Egypt and Giza and other places, they didn't look sandy brown at all. All of them were covered with white limestone. If you had seen them under the hot African sun, you'd have to look away. That's how smooth and shiny they were. Builders used around 6 million tons of this material for the Great Pyramid of Giza alone. It's the largest one you can still see on your trip to Egypt. The local rules were quite a thrifty crowd, and they reused some of the casing stones for other construction projects. A massive earthquake in the 14th century has also loosened some of the stones, so you won't see a lot of limestone, but some of it is still there, on top of the Pyramid of Khafre in Giza. It looks like it has a second peak on top of the first. In ancient times, all pyramids used to have capstones called pyramidions, covered in a mix of gold and silver. Most of them have been lost over the centuries, but you can still see a few of them at museums. They show images of Egyptian deities. The pyramids were probably modeled after a sacred pointed stone, the benben. It represented the rays of the sun. Now, lifting heavy rocks wasn't so simple without the tech we have today. I guess you'll agree with me if you helped your friends move at least once, and they made you carry the couch. But those smart Egyptians of the past thought of that and chose the pyramid shape. It lets the weight distribute evenly throughout the whole thing. The Statue of Liberty has also had a major makeover since it was first unveiled in 1886. Believe it or not, it used to be a shiny brown color, just like a penny. 20 years later, it changed its color to green. It wasn't a fashion statement, but a chemical reaction. The statue is covered with hundreds of thin copper sheets. When copper reacts with air, it naturally forms a protective layer called verdigris. This layer protects what's under it from corrosion, and that's why statues and other things made of copper, brass, and bronze can last so long. When Lady Liberty first turned green, people in authority decided it would be a good idea to paint it all over. It was way before social media, so you couldn't just drop an angry comment under the post describing the idea. But they wrote about it in the local newspapers, and the public didn't love the idea. Then the Times interviewed a copper and bronze manufacturer, and he confirmed they shouldn't repaint it, because removing the protective layer would mean destroying the statue. Over the years, people have suggested painting Lady Liberty several times, but no one has ever done it. I don't know about you, but I can't imagine that lady in any other color, so I guess it's for the better. You love bananas as much as I do? Next time you enjoy a juicy soft one, remember you gotta thank selective breeding for that texture. The original wild bananas had many large, hard seeds and not so much delicious pulp. And hey, who doesn't like a sugary watermelon? It has a history of over 5,000 years, and it used to have bitter, yellowish white flesh and was really tricky to open. Selective breeding saved the day again, and watermelons got way sweeter. Japanese scientists went further and invented the seedless version. Corn's grandmother is a Mexican grass called teosinte. The kernels in this grass were small and hard to get. Farmers from many thousands of years ago saved the seeds only of those plants that were larger or tastier, or with kernels that were easier to grind. Thanks, my friends, for giving us the corn that's edible and even delicious. And just imagine, wild avocados were so small that they could easily fit in the palm of your hand. The pit in them was so large you wouldn't find much edible material inside. They also had a much harder shell than the ones we're used to. You probably wouldn't get a lot of work done without your beloved computer today, but I can't tell you exactly whom to thank for this invention. The ABC from 1942 is one of the contendants for the title of the first computer. It's short for the Atanasoff Berry computer, named after its inventors at Iowa State University. The ABC weighed over 700 pounds. Yep, yours must be way lighter than that. That big boy consisted of around 300 vacuum tubes and had a rotating drum, a little bigger than a paint can, and had small capacitors on it. A capacitor is a gadget that can store an electric charge, like a battery. The ABC could solve problems with up to 29 different variables to help scientists save some time. Like modern computers, it used binary digits, ones and zeros, to represent all numbers and data. Because of that, it was possible to do the calculations electronically. And now, my favorite part, the ABC finished one operation about every 15 seconds. Just for you to compare, it's millions of operations per second now. Unlike the tech we use today, the ABC did not have a changeable stored program, so the program could only do a single task at a time. An operator had to write down the intermediate answer and then dial that back into the computer. Sounds like another reason to be happy we live in the 21st century. That remote control you use for all sorts of appliances has gone a long way too. Nikola Tesla, who gave us alternating current, designed one of the first wireless remote controls back in 1898. He named his invention teleautomation and demonstrated it on a miniature boat controlled by radio waves. The boat had a little metal antenna attached to it. Tesla sent signals to the boat using a box with a lever and a telegraph key, which was his version of a remote control. Those signals set electrical contacts on the boat into motion and moved the rudder and the propeller, and Tesla was controlling the boat. The concept of the remote control soon spread to other gadgets. The first television remote control followed in 1950. It was designed by the Zenith Radio Corporation, called LazyBone. Don't take it personally, please. This LazyBone had a massive cable that was attached to the TV set, and those who tried it didn't fall in love with the invention because they tripped over that cord. I feel your pain, my friends. If you live or work on one of the top floors, you gotta love this one. Meet the first passenger elevator. It traveled at the speed of 40 feet per minute. Not the fastest, I know, compared to today's record, which is 40 feet per second. But hey, it was built back in 1857 in New York and was more of a tourist attraction than a necessity. The elevator had a steam engine hidden in the basement of a 5-story building. 3 years later, they shut it down because the public didn't appreciate it. Otis Tufts filed the first patent for a vertical railway around the same time. His invention included an actual car with a bench inside for people to sit on. Sounds like a great spot to hang out with friends to me. What do you say? Then they started adding elevators to luxurious hotels around the world. They were entire rooms with a rich design, upholstered seats and mirrors on the walls, and sometimes even a small chandelier. There was an obligatory operator who'd close the door and the car would start its super slow ascent. It was still more about style than about speed, so I guess I'd choose the stairs. Scientists discovered something Atlantis-like near Australia. There used to be an entire continent that's now underwater. Here's what happened to it. Around 70,000 years ago, during the last ice age, there was a huge landmass called Sahul. It was located in the southwestern Pacific Ocean. This ancient supercontinent connected what we now know as Australia, New Guinea, Tasmania, and the Aru Islands into one giant piece of land. Imagine lush tropical rainforests surrounded by beautiful mountains. Sahul's tallest mountains were in the New Guinea highlands, with peaks reaching over 13,000 feet. This beautiful place was home to a variety of unique animals, most of which were pouched creatures. But back then, they weren't just koalas and kangaroos. Sahul was filled with different types of grazers, burrowers, scavengers, and predators. It was home to a huge diprotodon, a powerful hunter Thiosolio, and a horrifying Megalania, a creature that's much larger than any living lizard today. It was a unique place because the rest of the world was filled with placental animals at the time, like wolves, elephants, and humans. In Sahul, the only normal mammals were bats and rodents. But not all its parts were the same. The Timor, Arafura, and Carpentaria regions were covered by hot savanna and dry forests. It looked kinda like modern Australia, hot air deserts with scrubland, steppe, and temperate forests along the eastern coast. Back then, people were migrating all across the world. They made an incredible journey from Southeast Asia to Sahul and first arrived here from 60 to 45,000 years ago. They mostly traveled by foot and crossed the sea using bamboo rafts and simple boats. They came there from an ancient landmass called Sunda, which includes parts of Southeast Asia. They traveled across a series of islands known as Wallachia and eventually spread across Sahul. And it wasn't a small journey. Sahul was huge, around 4.1 million square miles. That's bigger than the USA or Canada. It stretched from the equator to around the southern part of New Zealand. So they arrived in what is now Australia and became Australia's first people. Scientists think that Sahul had a population of 500,000. We've discovered cave paintings that date back around 40,000 years. It's a hunting scene depicting an anoa, or miniature buffalo, facing figures of humans and animals. Researchers are trying to figure out how these early settlers moved across Sahul and where we might find archaeological evidence of their journey. To do this, they created a landscape evolution model. The simulation showed how Sahul changed between 75,000 and 35,000 years ago. It showed potential migration routes and archaeological sites. Humans likely traveled along coastlines and rivers. But how did Sahul get submerged off the coast of Australia, similar to the mythical Atlantis? During the last ice age, much of the Earth's water was locked up in large ice sheets and glaciers. The sea levels were much lower than they are today. After that, the global temperatures increased. The ice sheets melted and the sea levels rose, flooding the land bridges that once connected different parts of Sahul together. About 8,000 years ago, New Guinea separated from mainland Australia, and then, about 6,000 years ago, Tasmania did the same. We still can explore the underwater parts of Sahul thanks to new technology. Divers explore and collect samples directly from the ocean floor. Underwater drones can go to places that are too deep or dangerous for humans to explore. And with sonar mapping, scientists use sound waves to create maps of the ocean floor. It's like using an echo to see what's underwater. The sound waves bounce off the seabed and come back, helping us create a picture of what it looks like. Deep underwater, archaeologists have found stone tools and other artifacts. They also discovered fossils of animals like Diprotodon and Thylacoleo. By studying the underwater terrain of Sahul, they learned about the ancient rivers, lakes, and coastlines that existed during the Ice Age. But Sahul isn't the only underwater continent. Sahul isn't the only hidden gem of Southeast Asia. Take Sundaland, a place made up of Sumatra, Java, Borneo, and some other islands. This place was crazy huge during the Ice Age, but now almost fully underwater. Almost, but not entirely. The parts above the ocean are teeming with life. If you like birds, check this place out. It has almost a fifth of the world's bird species. You can spot colorful birds like the Java hawk eagle and the Bali starling among the lush forests. It's also a home to a fourth of Earth's fish species. Sundaland's waters are a haven for marine life, even the most exotic animals like the Asian arowanas. It's also a treasure trove of flowers. That's where you can find Rafflesia and Titan aurum, the world's largest flowers. This makes it very similar to Zealandia. Zealandia is a long, narrow piece of land about half the size of Australia. It broke from Antarctica about 100 million years ago. Just like Sundaland, it isn't fully underwater. 7% of it stayed above sea level. This sticking out little piece is what we now call New Zealand, along with Stewart Island and some smaller islands. These pieces of Zealandia are lush and warm. They're packed with volcanoes, mountain ranges, beautiful natural geysers, and hot springs. Local people, Maori, use these hot springs for cooking. People place corn, eggs, and vegetables in baskets and lower them directly in the hot springs. Sometimes they cook food in a pit oven using heated rocks. Another hidden world is known as Argoland. This mysterious landmass was once part of Australia, back when dinosaurs chilled around. It drove scientists crazy for decades. They knew it existed because it left a huge stretch on the ancient seafloor, the Argo Abyssal Plain. About 155 million years ago, it broke off from Australia, saying bye-bye. The continent drifted somewhere north, and when it reached Southeast Asia, it just vanished. Scientists had no idea where it went, but recently they finally found its remains. Turns out, poor Argoland's lower parts started drowning into the Sunda Trench, a horrifyingly deep oceanic pit. The Earth's crust sunk into the mantle. Meanwhile, the upper parts of Argoland were pushed upward, grabbing the younger rocks on land. Because of this, Argoland broke apart into a bunch of smaller pieces. These pieces formed parts of Borneo, Java, Sulawesi, and other regions. The remains are buried under Indonesia and Myanmar. Imagine a colossal landmass the size of Greenland, Greater Adria. Its journey began about 240 million years ago when it broke away from the supercontinent Gondwana. It started moving north, and after 100 million years of enjoying the warm seas, it suddenly crashed into Europe and shattered into pieces. Most of these pieces went deep into the Earth's mantle, but some were scraped off and became part of mountain ranges like the Alps. Today, the remnants of Greater Adria are scattered across more than 30 countries, from Spain to Iran. That's why they're hard to look for. Seychelles was also once part of Gondwana. Yep, these idyllic islands are sitting atop of the ancient continent. We know a lot about it because of its fascinating granite outcrops. 100 years ago, Alfred Wegener discovered continental drift, but no one believed him. These granite outcrops helped him prove that he's not crazy and that tectonic plates really are moving. The Seychelles broke off from India and Madagascar and eventually became a sad loner in the Indian Ocean. This probably happened because of some insanely active volcanoes in the Deccan Traps. But now the islands are home to unique species both on land and in the coral reefs nearby. Mauritius broke off from India after the dinosaur wiping. Along its journey, it stretched into a long ribbon-like shape and also broke into pieces. Now it's all scattered beneath the Indian Ocean. Scientists stumbled upon this lost land by studying tiny ancient crystals called zircons. These zircons are like time capsules. They date back an astonishing 660 million to 2 billion years. That's even older than Mauritius itself. These ancient crystals hinted that there's another Atlantis somewhere nearby. Turns out there are hidden continents all around the world, and maybe we'll discover more of them in the future. Before we get into the reason why and how there are pyramids all around the world, let's talk about some of the examples. I'll start with the Pyramid of the Sun in Mexico. These folks really knew how to build a city. Their well-planned urban center spanned over 7 square miles and boasted several pyramids. But the Pyramid of the Sun is the most impressive. This giant pyramid was built way back in 100 CE and is one of the biggest structures of its kind in the whole Western Hemisphere. It's so big that it's 216 feet high above the ground. If you ever find yourself in this ancient city, you won't be able to miss the Pyramid of the Sun. It's right there on the east side of the Avenue of the Dead, the city's main north-south street. To build this incredible pyramid, around 1 million cubic yards of material were used, including a special kind of red volcanic rock called hued tizontle. Impressive, huh? We don't know too much about the people who built the Pyramid of the Sun or its purpose. But archaeologists believe there was once a temple on top of it. When explorers went below the pyramid in the 1970s, they found a bunch of cool tunnels and chambers. In 2011, they even found a secret stash of clay pots, obsidian pieces, animal bones, human figurines, and a mask.
who knows what other secrets the pyramid is hiding? If you decide to see this one, you must climb the pyramid using the 248 uneven steps on the west side. Watch your step. Sudan got some pyramids too. Nubian pyramids aren't as big as the ones in Egypt, but they still got around 200 of them. These ancient pyramids have been home to the tombs of the pharaohs of the Meroitic kingdom for almost 1,000 years, who ruled Egypt from Nubia to the Mediterranean Sea. The pyramids at Meroe were constructed using granite and reddish sandstone. Oh, and did you know that Sudan has more ancient pyramids than Egypt? The Kushite pyramids depict the indigenous architecture and burial traditions of Nubia's Napata and Meroe kingdoms, which ancient Egypt influenced. Meroe, the burial site of over 40 queens and kings, is the most extensive Nubian pyramid site. The tomb walls depict mummified royals bedecked in jewelry, their wooden caskets containing bows, quivers of arrows, and other artifacts pointing to the Meroitic relationship and trade with Egyptian and Greek civilizations. So if you're looking for some ancient tombs to explore, you may consider skipping the crowds in Egypt and heading on down to Sudan. Let's fly to Iraq to see some more pyramids. Ziggurats have fancy receding layers and tiered temples. Instead of a smooth exterior, it has tiers like a cake, perfect for all the important work and rituals that went on inside. You can find these towering structures scattered throughout Iraq and Iran, and they're a real testament to the power and skills of the people who built them. One of the biggest and most impressive ziggurats is the ziggurat at Ur. It's basically a giant rectangular pyramid that stands a whopping 70 to 100 feet tall, with 3 levels of terraces and a temple on top. Can you imagine how many baked bricks it took to build that thing? Try 720,000 for just the lower portion. This particular ziggurat was built for Sumerian king Ur-Nammu. Similar to other ones, this pyramid has been around for thousands of years, so it got a little rough around the edges. Thankfully, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II and some archaeologists came to the rescue in the 6th and 20th centuries respectively, and now you can find this near Talil Air Base. The ziggurat at Ur was built in 2100 BCE by King Ur-Nammu for the moon deity Nana. It was the tallest building in the city, and you could see it from miles around. It was like the medieval cathedral spire of its day. People would come here to bring their agricultural surplus and get their food allotments and seek spiritual nourishment. Sadly, the Nana temple at the top of the ziggurat didn't survive, but we do have some blue glazed bricks that may have been part of its decoration. The lower parts of the ziggurat are pretty amazing though. The architects even included holes in the temple's baked exterior to let the water evaporate from its core. Since we explored some of the pyramids on our planet, let's take a broader perspective. They can be found in many parts of the world. Egypt has over 100 pyramids, double that number in Sudan, and dozens of others are scattered in the Middle East and China. The Americas have the most pyramids in total, with more pyramids than the rest of the world combined. These pyramids are located in Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Time to know more about the evolution of pyramids through history. The oldest pyramid is in Egypt. This pyramid was a step pyramid, which was created by placing one layer of stone on top of another. The pharaoh Sneferu is credited with creating the pyramid shape we recognize today. During his 45-year reign, he built 3 pyramids. His first 2 attempts failed, but he finally got it right with the Red Pyramid, which is considered the first true pyramid. It was Sneferu's son, Khufu, who built the Great Pyramid of Giza, which was the tallest human-made structure on Earth for almost 4,000 years. Latin American pyramids are similar to early Egyptian step pyramids, but they were built independently with no knowledge of each other. The pyramids in Sudan were built around 700 BCE and are tall but much narrower than those in Egypt. How in the world did all these civilizations build these things without even texting each other? After all, the Aztecs, Mayans, and ancient Egyptians were about as different as possible. But despite their cultural differences, they all seem to agree on one thing: pyramids were pretty cool. Step pyramids are all around the world because they were the most feasible and stable way to build large and tall structures without access to lighter building materials like wood and metal. The triangular form with a square base is the best way to build a sturdy structure, and having a cube structure would require more material for less height. Now, when it comes to pyramid design, the Egyptian pyramids were like giant triangles with a square base, smooth sides, and a pointy top. On the other hand, the Aztecs and Mayans went for a tiered cake look, with steps leading up to a flat platform on top. So, while all these pyramids share the same basic shape, they have their own unique flair. Each group built its pyramids using different materials, techniques, and slope angles. So while they may have been inspired by each other's work occasionally, they were just doing their own thing. Egyptian pyramids had smooth, angled sides that were designed to help the pharaoh's soul ascend to heaven. The Pyramid of the Sun was built over a series of caves that served as a passageway for the deities. The Maya built the temple of Kukulkan in Chichen Itza to honor the deity Kukulkan, usually represented by a serpent. Nicknamed El Castillo, it has 91 steps on each side, plus a platform. That's 365 steps, one for each day of the Mayan calendar. Tell me, Brightsiders, how were pyramids built? To begin with, humans made them, not a foreign race from space that landed on Earth. You see, one thing that all pyramids have in common is that they were built without advanced tools or even the wheel. It took a lot of people to build them, including skilled laborers and architects. For example, it's estimated that 20,000 people built the Great Pyramid of Giza, and it's believed that most of them were skilled laborers. Building pyramids was a massive undertaking that required years of planning and effort. The Great Pyramid at Cholula, Mexico, took 600 years to complete.
There once was a kingdom where the ancient Egyptians traveled to buy gifts for pharaohs, sort of like an ancient shopping mall. This kingdom, named the Land of Punt, was rich in luxury goods, including gold, aromatic resins, blackwood, ebony, ivory, and exotic animals like leopards and baboons. All of these sound like great gift ideas to me. The Land of Punt was an especially important trading partner for Egypt for over 1,000 years. But if you plan to go there, the bad news is that it hasn't survived to these days, and nobody knows for sure exactly where Punt was located. We only know about it from records. The most famous of them were left on the walls of the temple of Queen Hatshepsut, who had sent an expedition to Punt. Scientists have been trying to find the exact location of this rich land for over 150 years. It could have been southeast of Egypt, in a coastal region south of it along the Red Sea, Gulf of Aden, and the Indian Ocean, or it could have covered the Horn of Africa and the area across the sea in southern Arabia. Now researchers were finally able to narrow down the possible locations thanks to a study of baboon mummies. Ancient Egyptians admired baboons and even thought they were related to the deity of the moon and wisdom. One species, the sacred baboon, was often shown in wall paintings, sitting with its tail curled to the right, and was mummified in this position. Another type, the olive baboon, was wrapped up in one giant cocoon. Both types were found in the tombs of the Valley of the Kings. But if you remember geography lessons, baboons just don't wander around Egypt, so they must have been brought there through trade with other regions. Primatologists, Egyptologists, geographers, and geochemists look at the mummified baboons from two different time periods in ancient Egypt. Some were from the New Kingdom period, and others were from the Ptolemaic period. The scientists did some more hard work and analyzed tissues from 155 baboons from 75 separate places in eastern Africa and southern Arabia. Those were all areas that they thought could be the ancient land of Punt. They measured oxygen and strontium in the baboons' bodies. When animals drink water and eat plants, their teeth, hair, and bones show a geographic signature of where they've lived, thanks to these elements they contain. Scientists use a special method called isotopic mapping and found out that the New Kingdom baboons they analyzed came from a location in Eritrea, Ethiopia, or Somalia. 5 mummified baboons from the Ptolemaic period had strontium levels that matched those found in Egypt. So, ancient Egyptians might have had a special place to breed and keep baboons, probably in Memphis, a city in Lower Egypt, not Tennessee. Meanwhile, paleontologists from New Zealand got lucky, as some boulders had split open from the tide and revealed fossils of the largest penguin that has ever lived on Earth. The scientists used laser scanners to make 3D models of the ancient penguin bones. They compared these bones to the flipper size of modern penguins and did some math as to how much the old penguins might have weighed. Today, the biggest penguins, emperor penguins, weigh between 55 to 100 pounds. Researchers think that the penguins from the past that they found weighed around 340 pounds, real giants in the penguin world. These huge flightless birds lived in the oceans around New Zealand more than 50 million years ago, after the dinosaurs went extinct. They totally took advantage of their big bodies to stay warm in the cold water. They might have even traveled the world thanks to it. And they'd scare off any predators, but they didn't have any. The asteroid that took down the dinosaurs also got rid of most big marine reptiles, and the ancestors of seals and whales were still living on land. Back in 1992, 4 farmers in China were draining water from their ponds and accidentally bumped into a ship full of gold and ancient statues worth millions. Just kidding, they actually found the Longyu Caves. Those are 24 big caves created by people a long time ago. Even though they are so large and well-made, no one knows who built them, why they were built, or how they were built. Experts think the caves are at least 2,000 years old, but they don't understand why these caves aren't mentioned in any historical records. All of the Longyu caverns look the same and aren't connected to each other. Each cave has one entrance connected to a vertical shaft with a carved staircase. Rain and water from the surface can flow into the caves through these stairs. To manage this water, the caves have special grooves, channels, and a system to catch the water at the bottom. So it looks like the ancient builders were real pros when it came to drainage and water management. Maybe my town could learn a lesson from them, as it turns into Venice after every heavy shower. Anyway, the caverns were built below a hill, named after a bird that is one of the most respected creatures in Chinese mythology and culture. It symbolizes all the best things, like high virtue, grace, and the union of yin and yang. Scientists think there could be a connection between the caverns and the bird, but it's just a theory so far. Experts from the National Institute of Ocean Technology in India were doing their routine pollution surveys when they found some structures that looked like a city underwater. Using special sonar technology, the team found big geometric shapes on the ocean floor. They brought up different items from the site, like pottery, beads, sculptures, parts of walls, and even human bones and teeth. They thought the ruins belonged to a civilization older than the Bronze Age Indus Valley Civilization, which is the earliest urban culture of the Indian subcontinent that we know of so far. But not everyone joined in on celebrating this awesome discovery. Some archaeologists refused to believe it and thought it could be some computer tricks. And even when they saw hundreds of artifacts from the ocean floor, they said an ancient river could have brought them there from someplace else. The team that discovered the underwater site decided to prove they were right. They chose a piece of wood as their main evidence. They tested it and found it was 9,500 years old. That could be the age of the entire site. Skeptics still insist that we can't rewrite all human history because of one piece of wood. Even 23 years since the discovery, no one is sure about the final answer. This is partly because it's hard to explore the site. It's in extremely dangerous waters with strong currents and riptides. During the cool Antarctica summer, from late November through January, Geologists from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee climbed the frozen slopes of the McIntyre Promontory in the Transantarctic Mountains. High above the ice fields, they looked through the mountain's gray rocks for fossils from when the continent had green forests. By the end of their trip, the geologists found fossil pieces from 13 trees. These fossils show that the trees are over 260 million years old. This means the forest grew at the end of the Permian period before the first dinosaurs even appeared. More than 90% of all species on Earth disappeared back then, including the polar forests. These trees would have been very tough if they grew in Antarctica and could have survived. But a huge increase in gases like carbon dioxide and methane must have taken them down. This Antarctic forest is a terrific way for us to see what life was like before the extinction, and we might even understand what caused it. It also shows us how plants were different back then from those we are used to now.
Mirror check. You've got your beige parka on, your chisel is packed, and your overnight plane ride to Saudi Arabia is booked. You know what this means, right? Unfortunately, you weren't cast in the remake of Dune. It just means that you're ready to go explore the world's largest desert areas in the hopes of uncovering prehistoric secrets about our ancestors. Let's get one thing straight. If you ever thought that deserts were empty spaces, think again. They might be filled with sand as far as the eye can see, but they also hold a lot of history. You know, because before humans settled down in cities and towns, we were nomadic people, and we traveled all around the globe looking for food, water, and shelter. So we had to come up with some interesting stuff to survive. Like this thing that was found in the desert of Saudi Arabia. Do you have any idea what this could have been? Over many years, scientists have discussed the origins and use of huge structures such as these ones. It seems our Neolithic ancestors were way smarter than we gave them credit for. They didn't spend all their hours around the fire carving weapons out of stone. No, they were also practicing their architectural skills. These huge stone structures are called desert kites, because if you look at them from a distance, well, they sort of look like kites. Archaeologists have arrived at the consensus that these kites were used to lure animals in. This way, it would make it easier for our ancestors to guarantee their week's food. But that's not all. Take a look at these monolithic structures right here. They show us that our ancestors probably drew on rocks, the blueprint of what they were going to build on the ground. Just like modern-day architects, desert kites could be miles long, so they drew out a plan before actually building them. The most surprising feature of all is that these kites were built even before things such as Stonehenge. We're talking around 7,000 to 9,000 years ago. Over the last decade, scientists have been able to identify over 6,000 desert kites spread across the Middle East and West and Central Asia. If you don't think this huge, try building something this large without the help of any drones. It looks like a pretty difficult feat to me. And apparently, Saudi Arabia's desert is filled with more amazing things. Scientists have found mysterious stone structures that are older than the pyramids of Giza in Egypt. So of course, you can't wait to go check that out. Can we all agree that carrying around heavy rocks to build a pyramid without the help of modern technology sounds absurd? I mean, how on earth did they do it? Now imagine turning back the clock about 2,000 years into the past and finding humans that built similar gigantic structures in isolated areas. Take a look at these so-called mustadils. They are rectangular structures built from piled-up stones, found over 77,000 square miles. Some archaeologists believe that these monuments were used for ritualistic purposes, maybe processions of some kind, where people would walk from one end of the plateau to the other. I'd be down for that. Now let's move on to another deserted area. We're entering the world-famous Sahara Desert landscape. Isn't it beautiful? Here, you're about to unravel an ancient mystery, something that took years for researchers to solve. Fun fact, the Sahara Desert is the world's largest hot desert. It spans over 3 million square miles, which would be like putting 1,000 times the country of Hawaii next to each other. We say it's the largest hot desert because the world's largest desert area is Antarctica. But we all know temperatures over there are freezing, not the typical image of when we think of a desert. Deep into the desert, near the Algerian town of Fougeret et Zoua, something strange was found. For decades, these tiny dots appeared on images of Google Earth, but nobody could explain what they were. Some scientists were sure that these circles are the result of oil activity in the region. Others guessed that these were ancient fogaras or ancient water wells. There are dozens of them, stretching for miles and miles in a straight line. The strange thing is that they are always far away from any town, road, or human activity in general. So what was or is their purpose? If you had to take a guess, what would you say? Remember we talked about how our ancestors had to be creative in order to survive in the desert? Let's try to walk in their shoes for a minute. Imagine you're a nomadic hunter-gatherer living in a desert area. You spend your days basking in the hot sun, trying to count all the grains of sand around you. But you also need to eat and drink water. But how on earth do you get water in a desert? Sure, you can hope to keep running into oasis every week or so, but that seems a bit risky, doesn't it? That's why North African people invented the so-called fogaras. The fogaras are a 2,500-year-old irrigation system. Locals would dig deep wells in elevated areas, wells deep enough to tap into underground water. Then, they would dig parallel shafts at regular distances. This way, the water would flow from the main well down into all the shafts and irrigate entire areas. Travelers could stop by the shafts and quench their thirst. They could also raise livestock and tend to crops. Pretty clever, huh? As much as these holes did look like fogaras, a little bit of research would show you that they're not. You see, these shafts were built in a line, and not in a circular shape like the ones we're looking at now. So maybe it has something to do with the second option? Maybe these desert holes were related to oil activity in the region? Let's have a look at the holes up close and personal. From Google Earth, they don't seem that big, but in real life, they are huge craters. The tip to uncovering what they are is hidden beneath the sand. If you were one of the researchers originally uncovering the truth behind this mystery, you would have found something unique hidden in the sand. Old dynamites and vintage sardine cans. Putting the pieces of the puzzle together, scientists found that these sardine cans were a model from the 1950s and 1960s. It seems that entire teams from that decade would camp out while they surveyed the area for oil. And what about the dynamites? These were used for seismic surveying. This is an old technique, used to identify if there is oil and gas beneath the Earth's surface. Still in North Africa, you find out about another desert mystery worth exploring. Near the city of Deciphered, southwest of Algeria's capital, one runs into 13 peculiar monuments. These structures are also called jedars, and yes, I am aware of how much that may sound like a Star Wars reference. They are pyramid-like in their shapes, and as far as scientists know, they were used as final resting places for the people who lived in the region. Can you guess who these were? Most likely the Berber nomads. And since we're talking about ancient stuff, they were probably built between the 4th and 7th centuries CE. Once scientists began to explore the insides of these monuments, they found they were pretty big inside. They found large underground vaults, chambers, and labyrinth-like corridors that gave way to over 20 compartments. It could take you up to 2 hours to walk around in them, and apparently our ancestors also used its walls to depict images of animals and hunting scenes. There's no definite proof of what these jedars were used for, though. This is so neat, huh? I'm sure that our world's desert is filled with many more mysterious things for us to unravel. I guess I'll see you next time so that we can continue our explorations.
You are lost deep within the jungle in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. There are strange noises all around you, and to make it worse, the sun is setting. Soon, you'll be alone in the middle of an unknown rainforest. Guess it was a pretty bad idea to come looking for El Dorado on your own, wasn't it? You keep walking as fast as you can, when suddenly, wait! What's this you're seeing? It looks like large stairways made out of stone. This definitely doesn't look natural, so you take a picture. Maybe you didn't strike gold, but you might have just found something relevant. Congratulations, you found Akamtun, a long-lost Mayan city. Hidden 37 miles into the jungle, the name literally translates to stone column. Stone was probably in at the time, so these guys used a lot of it to build their pyramids, houses, and even ball courts. If you ever thought that Europeans invented ball games, think twice. Mayans loved to play ball games for recreational purposes. Akamtun is part of a series of other long-lost Mayan cities that are being discovered with the help of new technology nowadays. We'll talk more about the other ones in a jiffy. Perhaps the biggest surprise of this one is that it was surrounded by wetlands, which is why the city was built on high ground. The city was monumental, covering an area of over 120 acres. That would be as big as 90 football fields right next to each other. Scientists have found proof that Akhenaten had pyramids of up to 49 feet high, and that it was likely an important social hub between 250 and 1000 CE. This is definitely a game changer. But lost Mayan cities began to be unearthed in the 19th century. Modern technologies, such as LiDAR imaging, help archaeologists see through dense canopies of the forests. This means that people don't really have to risk getting lost in the tropical jungle like you did at the beginning of this video. LiDAR works sort of like an X-ray. It sends out laser beams that can detect any signs of ruins or ancient constructions. According to space archaeologist Sarah Parchak, satellite imagery has been a key player in discovering ancient cities in South America, Egypt, and other places. Sarah herself spends most of her days scouring images for any signs of where there could have been cities long ago. She says that more often than not, what happens is that ruins are covered by vegetation, soil, or sand, which makes them super tricky to find. But thanks to these awesome tools, scientists also made the huge discovery of ancient Mayan causeways, which spread throughout old Mayan territories. I mean, take a look at these roadways. You'd expect to see ruins like this in places such as Portugal, England, or the United States. I'm talking about 130 feet wide roads painted white to help travelers journey through the nighttime. Scientists recently unearthed a 110-mile network of roads such as these, and they think this dates back to before the first registered Mayan highways we've known so far. These roadways, which sometimes ran over the swampy ground and were even elevated at times, are being called the world's first superhighways. Even if there is no registry of animal-powered vehicles, it's believed that the Maya used them to travel around a network of possible 964 settlements. They were built like a huge spiderweb, and from what archaeologists have gathered, this huge system of roads worked to connect a big system of economic and social interactions between Mayan cities. This completely debunks the traditional idea that the Mayan pre-classic period, which dates back to 2000 BCE, was made of small, tribal settlements. Imagine the manpower and engineering ability you need to muster to build something close to these white highways. Scientists believe that these causeways were built pretty much the same way as the Mayans built their pyramids, with a mixture of mud and quarry stone. Oh, and using several layers of limestone to make them white. That's pretty cool, right? But let's take a few steps back for a moment to get some context. The Mayans were one of the biggest pre-Columbian civilizations living in the Americas. Until now, experts believe that at its apex, the Mayan civilization consisted of over 40 cities, with a population of millions of people. That's a lot of folks. Their civilization spanned Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, Guatemala, and Belize. And they survived mainly on agriculture. The thing is, the Yucatan Peninsula was an extremely difficult place to grow crops. So the Mayans had to develop a complex irrigation system in most of their cities. They built a series of ceremonial buildings, pyramids, and plazas. The Mayans might have been keen pyramid builders, but they also developed an advanced astronomical system. With whatever ancient technology they had, they were able to predict the exact location of planets such as Venus and Mars, as well as the exact dates of eclipses. If you've ever seen examples of ancient Mayan cities, this is Tikal. Located at the heart of the Guatemalan jungle, Tikal is believed to have been the capital of the ancient Mayan conquest state. At its height, it was comparable in importance to cities such as London or New York in today's world. It's composed of a series of complex monuments. The North Acropolis is one of Tikal's most ancient complexes of monuments. Built solely by human hands around 350 BCE, it served as the resting place of kings and chiefs. Its monuments are up to 200 feet high. Back in the day, the step pyramid temples were painted a beautiful red. Mayans loved that color. Today, of course, you'll only see the limestone. Then there's Chichen Itza. It's got one of the best preserved pyramids on Earth to date. Located in Mexico's Yucatan state, this Mayan city is well over 1,500 years old. At its peak, it was home to 35,000 people. The site covers 4 square miles of land. The highlight is El Castillo, a tremendous step-like temple standing 80 feet above ground. Its most peculiar feature is that it has 91 steps up each of its 4 sides, including the upper platform, which makes for 365 steps, the same number of days as the solar year. You can see that these folks were a pretty big deal, huh? That's why nobody can really understand what happened to them. There's a big lack of evidence on the decline of this almighty empire. What could have been the cause of their demise? Was it a drought? New research in 2017 did bring some new discoveries into the mix. Using data from a site at Ceibal, located at southwest of Tikal, scientists analyzed radiocarbon data from ceramics and archaeological excavations to extract new information about the unexpected demise of this great civilization. The information shows that instead of a sudden collapse, the Mayans most likely fell in waves of social instability and political crises. These events are believed to have deteriorated Mayan city centers and began causing the dispersion of the Mayan population. It's hard to pinpoint the exact causes, though. But hey, recent discoveries are shedding a big light on humanity's past. Not only about the Mayan Empire, but about other long-lost civilizations of South America. A major recent discovery in Brazil was done using satellite imaging technology and is also shocking scientists. Some images from near the Xingu River, also in the Amazon, suggest that cities of millions of people might have existed inside the jungle, way before our modern civilization ever existed. I mean, if this doesn't shock you, I don't know what will. Satellite imagery also detected a network of trenches dating back to 200 and 1200 CE in the Bolivian Amazon forest. These proofs suggest settlements that could have supported around 60,000 people right in the middle of the Amazon forest. When researchers from the University of Florida went on ground to check the satellite information, they were shocked to find several mounds that were accompanied by ditches and geoglyphs. Archaeologists also found remnants of carefully designed walls centered around plazas, much like the type of construction done by the ancient Mayans.
Rikat structure is a giant formation in the Sahara that looks exactly like a giant bullseye. It's so wide that you can see it from space. Even the CIA got interested in it. In 1965, they planned a flyover looking for geomagnetic anomalies. The findings are still classified. Perhaps the theories are true, and this place is truly the lost city of Atlantis. Now, Atlantis supposedly sank beneath the waves, but recent discoveries are pointing us in a different direction. This is an ancient story that goes far back in time, and Plato was the first to mention it. The place had loads of greenery and a curious structure: 3 concentric circles of land surrounding 2 circles of water. 2 key quotes from Plato's writing suggest that Atlantis might not have been a typical island in the middle of the ocean. Plus, Atlantis had a major influence from Africa and Europe, challenging the idea of it being in the Atlantic. It turns out that the Eye of the Sahara and Atlantis look alike. When astronauts saw the Eye of Sahara from above, they initially suspected a meteorite impact crater, but the rings of the structure matched the layout described of Atlantis. More importantly, the Sahara wasn't always a desert. It turned from a tropical region into a desert around 11,000 years ago. Researchers found evidence of a massive river called the Tamaracet that could have sustained a community. This river flowed toward the Rikat structure, aligning with Plato's description. The Trans-Saharan Seaway ran through the Sahara 50 to 100 million years ago. The sea allegedly destroyed Atlantis around 11,500 years ago, likely due to a rapid rise in sea level caused by the end of the Ice Age. NASA's worldview imagery shows patterns consistent with this theory. Those concentric rings might be a key to unlocking the secrets of our planet's evolution over millions of years. They're shaped by erosion on resilient rock layers. creating a spooky pattern of ridges and troughs. The central peak stands proud at 1,300 feet. The central part has undergone a significant erosion makeover, revealing a circular structure with a raised peak. Unlike impact craters, the Eye of the Sahara flaunts a striking balance and symmetry. Some say it results from rock uplift, sculpted by wind and water. Others think it's an ancient anticline, eroded to reveal its concentric glory. Then there's a salt diapir theory, suggesting that salt's buoyancy sculpted this beauty. Dating techniques have proved that it formed 541 to 252 million years ago, give or take a million or two. Ancient tools are scattered around the outer rings of the structure near riverbeds. Some older stone tools have also been spotted in the same areas. And still, even though some spear points from the Neolithic period have been found, there aren't many signs that people were living there back then. The area seems to have been used for short-term activities like hunting and making tools. There are other unearthly mysteries that haunt our world. One such enigma is in Norway, the ominous Hessdalen light phenomenon, also known as the Valley of Lights, leaves scientists confused. This valley is 10 miles wide. It's quite isolated, but a peculiar blue box sits high on the hillside, equipped with cameras scanning the valley. The unsettling saga began in the 1980s, when the night sky over Hessdalen erupted with burning fireballs, a recurring spectacle that sent shivers down the spines of those who witnessed it. This wasn't a fleeting occurrence, rather it became a regular thing. Terrified locals reported encounters with these unexplained luminous phenomena, some of which happened near their homes. Unease spread like wildfire. At its peak, there were about 20 sightings every week. The phenomenon made its way into newspapers, magazines, and media worldwide. Soon, people flocked to the valley, hoping to see the lights themselves. In 1984, experts joined the fray, armed with sophisticated instruments like magnetometers, radiometers, and other ometers. What they encountered was mind-bending, lights that defied explanation. Some moved at a leisurely pace, while others raced through the sky at an astonishing 19,000 miles per hour. People tried to explain these lights: airplanes, distant reflections, ball lightning, satellites, planets, meteors. But the speed and how these lights danced ruled out all those theories. We're slowly approaching another mysterious place. This is the greatest subglacial lake among Antarctica's 675 known lakes. It can easily hide unknown life forms. This lake is beneath the East Antarctic ice sheet. Dive about 2.5 miles under the ice, and there you'll see Lake Vostok, located at 1,600 feet below sea level. This lake is 155 miles long and 31 miles wide at its broadest point. With an average depth of 1,400 feet, it's also the world's sixth largest by volume. It's like an underwater city with lofty pillars and deep basins. The secret lake was discovered in 1993, yet it had been waiting to be found down there for over 2,000 years, collecting ancient secrets. In 2012, scientists drilled through the ice, creating the longest ice core ever. They pierced the ice all the way to the lake's surface. The year 2013 brought an unexpected twist when the tranquil waters erupted during the extraction of an ice core, mixing with drilling fluids. Then they got a pristine water sample in 2015. Some believe there might be previously unknown life forms down there, since it's a fossil water reserve that's been untouched for millions of years. That could be a lot like those speculated ice-covered oceans on moons like Europa and Enceladus. It all started with a theory in the 19th century, suggesting fresh water lurking under Antarctic ice sheets. Then, in 1955, seismic soundings hinted at a subglacial lake, and by the 90s, satellite data confirmed Lake Vostok's existence. Now, Lake Vostok isn't alone. In 2005, they found an island in the middle of the lake. Then, two smaller lakes joined the party. They suspect that a secret network of subglacial rivers might link these lakes. Now, very far away from Antarctica, in Venezuela, Catatumbo lightning presents a sinister light show at the junction of the Catatumbo River and Lake Maracaibo. This unsettling lightning phenomenon happens at about 140 to 160 nights a year, going on for 10 hours a day, and can flash up to 280 times in a single hour. The frequency of this lightning show changes with the seasons and from year to year. There was a break between January to March in 2010, causing a bit of worry that it might vanish forever. As the sun sets, winds from the east start picking up speed. This strong wind is called a nocturnal low-level jet, like what you see in the Great Plains of North America. These winds bring moisture, mostly from the Caribbean and the lake itself. This humid air hits high mountain ridges, causing thunderstorms to form over the mountains. Thanks to the ongoing wind situation, more thunderstorms appear as the night goes on. This pattern repeats itself, and is why this area has the highest annual lightning rate globally. The next place scientists cannot explain is in China. That is the Longyu Caves. They have lofty slanted roofs and sturdy pillars. The spot remained hidden for centuries. These human-made caverns, built around 2,000 years ago, decided to reveal themselves only in the 90s. Local farmers drained some ponds and unveiled 5 massive caverns. Further digging exposed an additional 19 smaller caves. They range from 60 to 110 feet in width and 26 to 50 feet in height. Archaeologists found historical relics from the reign of Emperor Zhuan of Han, dating back to over 2,000 years ago. Now, how did these caves survive for more than 2 millennia without falling apart? No ancient records explain the way they were crafted either. The walls show chisel marks, hinting at some layer-by-layer chiseling action, but the exact construction process is still a head-scratcher.
Researchers have found almost 1,000 previously hidden Maya settlements in the tropical lowlands of what is now northern Guatemala. They did it with LiDAR, light detection and ranging lasers, which they used to scan areas from the air. The region we're talking about is pretty vast. All those structures and buildings they saw over there stretch across about 650 square miles. And these spots were supposedly occupied thousands of years ago. It seems all these structures were pretty densely packed, so people lived close to each other. They had at least 417 ancient villages, towns, and cities where they could identify boundaries. These structures and buildings were actually a part of a state that looked like a kingdom. Some of these settlements were built as sports courts, civic, ceremonial, and religious centers, and residential homes. There were also massive palaces, platforms, dams, pyramids, and causeways across that area. People who lived there also had reservoirs where they collected water. So, they needed the power to organize thousands of specialists and workers. And they also needed many skilled people to build such structures without the technologies we have today. They needed lime producers, architects, mortar and quarry specialists, lithic technicians, those who took care of legal enforcement, and other important roles to establish the true community. This cool laser scanning system researchers used while exploring this area can even penetrate very dense ecosystems and vegetation. The light bounces off different surfaces and then creates a digitally reconstructed map. This map is based on how much time it takes for the pulses to get back to a receiver. So, with this laser system, they discovered there were also lowlands for agriculture. So why exactly did the Mayas settle in this region? It was a specific area. Plus, it was hard to build such an amazing kingdom in a tropical rainforest climate. Back in the old times, ancient peoples had mostly inhabited areas in drier climates. Over there, they would build water resources, which were some sort of the basis of society and a source of life. An example of this is Teotihuacan of Highland Mexico, although they did have a couple of navigable rivers they could use for transport and trade. But these rainforest areas had their advantages too. The Maya used natural resources like limestone, which was their primary building material, salt, and the volcanic rock obsidian, which they used for different tools. Also, they managed to find enough dry land to live and build homes there. The lowlands were seasonal swamps called bajos, and they were perfect for agriculture because of the fertile soil. Generally, the Maya built settlements that could endure rainy periods too. They were ready for different circumstances, including flood and drought, which is something you could see in how they built houses. Their architecture was also one piece of evidence that showed their community was like a centralized kingdom-like state, which shows they stuck together through tough times. The Mayan Empire was very powerful, and it reached its peak about the 6th century CE. They were excellent at pottery, agriculture, writing, mathematics, and calendars. They were the ones who created complex calendar systems, such as the calendar round, which is based on 365 days. Although some believed the Mayan calendar predicted December 21, 2012 would be the end of the world, it was just a coincidence with the end of a certain full cycle. They would call it the long count calendar, and it lasts 5,125 years. The Mayan people left behind an impressive amount of astonishing architecture and symbolic artwork. Most of their stone cities ended up abandoned by 900 CE. No one still knows why the Mayan civilization in that area collapsed, although there are some theories. Some think that by the 9th century, these people had exhausted the resources around them to the point that they could no longer feed and sustain such a big population. Others believe some city-states didn't get along that well, so they broke down the traditional system of power they used to have. Some say it was all because of a very long period of drought. It could be a combination of all these factors, though. But one Mayan city, located on an island, even survived until the 17th century. It was long after the rest of the Mayan civilizations had been destroyed or abandoned. If you're a traveler, you might know the town by its modern name, Flores. Scientists believe about 2,000 people lived there. The earliest Maya people were farmers. They cultivated crops like beans, squash, corn, and cassava. As they had many interesting ingredients, they created hundreds of cool recipes. Many of those are still present even today. For example, in modern Mexican cooking. And especially popular are papayas, cacao, avocados, squash, pineapples, chili peppers, beans, and so on. Even though the Maya mostly practiced a kind of primitive type of slash-and-burn agriculture, there is also evidence of them using some more advanced farming methods, like terracing and irrigation. And they were big chocolate lovers. More than 3,500 years ago, the Olmecs of Mesoamerica probably turned out to be the first to realize that it takes some work for us to get such a cool thing as chocolate. But the Maya were the ones who turned it into a true form of art. Scientists found out about it when they found cacao in Mayan pottery. Their chocolate would be mixed with honey, water, cornmeal, and chili peppers. That's how you get a spicy, savory, hot chocolate beverage you can try even today in Mexico and Central America. Also, they used written language in their books. Their paper was made from fig tree bark, and using strips of that paper, they created a large library of books. Books made of this material are called codices, and 4 of these can still be found today. Sadly, many books were lost over time because of the humid climate or some human factors. The classic Maya built a bunch of palaces and temples that had a stepped pyramid shape. They decorated them with inscriptions and reliefs, which have earned them the reputation of being incredible artists of Mesoamerica. For the Mayans, flat foreheads were the most desirable thing on someone's face. They were generally really into aesthetics, and having a flat forehead was one of the main things where you could meet their highest aesthetic standard. They also liked to glam up their looks with makeup and clothing. Also, the Mayans were master tattoo artists. Actually, they were one of the first civilizations that started doing such forms of body art. They had a rich culture and believed in many things, such as fairies. Many civilizations across the globe believed in these mythical creatures, which had different names everywhere. The Mayans called those creatures aluxes. They would make sculptures of aluxes from wood or clay, take them to the forest, and hide in some secret spots. The Maya believed these sculptures would come to life during the night and take the role of guardians of their land, animals, and crops. The Maya believed caves were entrances that led to the underworld. You can even visit some of these caves if you like. For example, you can explore the jungles of Quintana Roo and Yucatan near Cancun. There are many spots where researchers found artifacts the Mayans had left behind. They were one of the first cultures that learned how to use rubber latex and make, for example, rubber balls for the many interesting games they had. They used natural latex and then probably mixed it with some other natural substances. That's how they came up with the bouncy balls they played with. They also built cool steam baths. The Maya had structures made from stone that looked like something we know today as bathtubs. Plus, they were building heated stone structures we know as sweat houses. Researchers found these in El Salvador and Guatemala, and they were previously hidden under volcanic ash. It used to be one of the most prosperous ancient cities. It had features that were unthinkable for other locations during the Bronze Age, like water systems and intricate architecture. Yet somehow, it didn't become famous. What's even more mysterious is that at some point, it became abandoned. Mohenjo-Daro was a thriving city during the Indus Valley Civilization in the Bronze Age. It had a population of at least 40,000 people. It was close to Mesopotamia and Egypt in terms of social, cultural, and economic features. Despite this, it's lesser known than the more famous cities in these regions, like Babylon or Memphis. It was eventually abandoned by 1700 BCE, and the reason for its abandonment and the fate of its inhabitants remains unknown to this day. In 1911, archaeologists discovered the ancient city of Mohenjo-Daro after hearing reports of some unusual buildings in the area. However, local Indian authorities dismissed them as not having any historical significance, and the site remained untouched for several more years. It wasn't until 1922 that a local specialist believed he had found a buried local monument at the site. This led to large-scale excavations and the eventual naming of Mohenjo-Daro as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1980. The remains uncovered showed us that Mohenjo-Daro was an incredibly modern city for that time. It is considered the best preserved ruin of the Indus Valley. One of Mohenjo-Daro's most impressive features was its advanced sanitation system. Unlike in Egypt and Mesopotamia, where such appliances were only for the rich, Mohenjo-Daro had hidden toilets and covered drains throughout the city. Excavations have uncovered over 700 wells, as well as private baths and a large communal bath. Remarkably, even private homes had toilets, and waste was efficiently disposed of through a city-wide sewage system. The people of Mohenjo-Daro were highly aware of their surroundings. As the city was located near the Indus River, they built a strong defense against floods by using clever drainage systems. Over the centuries, they produced beautifully crafted pottery, jewelry, figurines, and other items that were traded as far as Mesopotamia and present-day Oman. Archaeologists have observed the use of standardized building materials in this ancient city, even though they didn't have the necessary machines back in the day. Interestingly, all the bricks were nearly the same. This shows great attention to detail in the city's design, as using consistent bricks creates an elegant look in the spaces within the city. People living in this area used the Indus Valley script to communicate with each other. This mysterious alphabet might be the key to unlocking more secrets from Mohenjo-Daro. It was a language that used symbols instead of letters and had over 400 signs. Problem is, we're still trying to figure it out. The mystery of what caused the end of the Indus civilization and Mohenjo-Daro remains unsolved. Some archaeologists suggest that the Indus River might have changed its direction. This could have led to problems in cultivating food if there was suddenly too much water in the city. However, there is no evidence that flooding destroyed the area, or that it was completely abandoned at once. A change in the river's course couldn't have been enough for the entire Indus civilization to disappear. Mohenjo-Daro isn't the only lost town from Eastern civilizations. Ross Island, for instance, was once known as the Paris of the East due to its stunning architecture and gardens. However, the island is now a shadow of its former self, with the buildings being largely overtaken by tree roots and vines. Located 1.8 miles off the coast of Port Blair, India, the small territory was initially used as a jail, but later became a luxurious resort for its administrators. After the complex was closed in 1937, an earthquake further damaged the island and it became uninhabitable. Today, the island is managed by the Indian government and attracts tourists interested in exploring abandoned towns. Another lost city tells the story of why Kolmanskop, a ghost town located in Namibia, is still home to remnants of German architecture. Once a luxury destination in the early 1900s, it was settled by German workers looking for diamonds. The city boasted amenities such as a ballroom, a hospital, and even a bowling alley. However, its popularity began to wane in the late 1910s when another diamond-rich location was discovered nearby. Most of the inhabitants left in search of better fortunes, leaving the buildings behind. The hot climate and low humidity have preserved the structures over time, and tourists can now visit this desert ghost town from the nearby town of Lüderitz. Hashima Island is a reminder of how nature reclaims its land when humans leave. It was famously featured in a James Bond movie due to its eerie atmosphere. The island was initially opened in 1881 for undersea coal mining, and the population of the island grew to a peak of 5,000 people in 1959. Unfortunately, the mines closed in the 1970s, and people began to slowly leave the island, resulting in complete abandonment in a period of 3 months. Now, the island is a popular tourist destination as visitors explore deserted homes, swimming pools, stores, and factories. The discovery of gold in a creek near Bannock, Montana in 1862 caused the population of the town to grow from a few hundred to thousands in a few short years. Unfortunately, this rapid expansion was followed by a sharp decline because more gold had been found in other areas nearby. As a result, Bannock was eventually made the first territorial capital of Montana, but only held the title for less than a year before being replaced by Virginia City. The state of Montana later acquired most of the land in 1954 and made it Bannock State Park. The ancient city of Petra, located in Jordan, was fascinating because it was half built, half carved into the rock and surrounded by mountains. It's a popular tourist destination these days, but at one point it was abandoned too. Many things led to its decline, like bad government and changes in how people traded. Natural disasters didn't help either. This city saw a lot of earthquakes ruining its constructions and damaging its water systems. Since people had no place to live, no water, and nothing to sell to make money, they eventually moved on to better locations. The city remained hidden for almost 500 years until it was rediscovered in the 1800s. Most of the tourists going to Santorini have no idea that the island is home to the remains of one of the largest volcanic eruptions in human history, the Thera eruption. This catastrophic event took place some 3,600 years ago. Akrotiri, one of the towns on the island at the time, was buried under the eruption. Unlike Pompeii, however, no traces of people and civilization were found, suggesting that people had enough time to flee the volcano before it blew up. Henry Ford, the renowned American industrialist, created the Ford Motor Company in 1903. In 1927, he began working on a grand project, Fordlandia. His goal was to construct a massive rubber plantation near the Tapajos River in Brazil to provide a steady supply of rubber for his car tires and hoses. His idea was to make the town a paradise, with swimming pools, golf courses, bungalows, and even weekly square dancing sessions. Unfortunately, the trees in the plantation soon became infected with leaf fungus, making the project a failure. Ford invested a whopping $20 million in this endeavor, yet it was unable to produce the necessary rubber. so Ford sold the land to the Brazilian government in 1945. The buildings that were built are still there, although they have been taken over by nature and are visited by tourists. Sky City is a residential area located in the Asian Hangzhou suburbs. It was built in 2007 and was intended to be a replica of Paris. The city even has its own Eiffel Tower, as well as copies of other iconic Parisian landmarks like the Opera Garnier and the Champs-Élysées. It also has luxurious villas and apartments, a man-made lake, gardens, and parks. Despite its grand plans, it's almost completely abandoned. Nobody wants to live here because it's really expensive. It is, however, a pretty nice location for locals to take pictures, in case they want to trick people into thinking that they just landed in the French capital.
Imagine that it's the year 2025, and our planet has completely changed. Rising sea levels, extreme weather, and the ocean becoming more and more acidic are just some of the problems people have been dealing with for years. But in one of the world's largest coastal cities, the situation has become too serious. It was a sunny day in June when a massive earthquake shook the city to its core. The ground beneath people's feet heaved and shook, and buildings swayed dangerously. People ran through the streets in panic, trying to find safety. But as soon as the ground settled, the inhabitants of the city realized the real danger. A wall of water, almost 100 feet high, was rushing toward the city, propelled by the force of the earthquake. The tsunami hit the city with unimaginable force. Entire neighborhoods were wiped out, and thousands of people lost their lives. But here's where things get interesting. In the aftermath of the disaster, the city's authorities realized that they couldn't just rebuild the city as it was before. They needed to be better prepared for the next potential disaster. And so they came up with an incredibly ambitious project to build an underwater city. The goal was to create a self-sufficient, sustainable city beneath the ocean's surface that could withstand any natural disaster. The underwater city would be powered by renewable energy, using tidal power and underwater solar panels. It would be designed to withstand extreme weather and would have its own emergency response systems. The project attracted some of the world's top scientists, engineers, and architects. They worked tirelessly to design the city and carefully considered every aspect of the project. The underwater city would have everything that a typical city had, from schools and hospitals to stores and restaurants. There would be underwater farms where fish and other marine creatures could grow. The city would even have its transportation system, advanced submarines, and underwater tunnels connecting different parts of the city. The project became a shining beacon of hope for people. It showed that even in the face of disaster, we could come together to create something amazing. But as time went on, the project no longer seemed so perfect. The cost of the project turned out to be higher than planned. There were also concerns about how long such a project would exist. After all, the ocean is very unpredictable. And still, the team of scientists and engineers never gave up. After years of trial and error, they finally created the perfect underwater city, a marvel of engineering, a self-contained ecosystem that could sustain people indefinitely. The buildings were constructed from a material that could withstand the immense pressure at the bottom of the ocean, and the city itself was powered by a network of advanced hydroelectric turbines. It wasn't long before the first wave of colonists arrived at the underwater city. There were different people in this group, and each of them had their own reasons for choosing to live in this new world beneath the waves. Some were adventurers seeking a new world to explore, while others were hoping to escape natural disasters raging on dry land. But despite their differences, all these people shared a common goal: to build a new society, one that was in harmony with the natural world. The underwater city flourished, and new discoveries were made every day. The colonists developed new technologies and ways to tame the power of the ocean. They learned to farm the sea and started cultivating underwater gardens that provided them with a steady food supply. But living underwater was challenging. People felt isolated and even claustrophobic. The situation came to a head when a group of activists started to protest against the city's expansion plans. They argued that the underwater city was a threat to the environment it was meant to protect, and that the colonists should focus on reducing their impact on the delicate underwater life. The protests sparked a heated debate among the colonists. Some of them argued that the survival of the city depended on its growth and expansion, Others claimed that the city needed to prioritize the protection of the environment above all else. In the end, a compromise was reached. The city would continue to expand, but the main priority would be sustainability and a responsible attitude to nature. The colonists would do their best to reduce their impact on the environment by using new technologies and following strict conservation rules. And they would also remember the importance of protecting the ocean and its fragile ecosystem. Years went by, and the underwater city continued to thrive. New generations of colonists were born, and they grew up in a world entirely different from the one their ancestors had known. They never saw the world on the surface, but appreciated the beauty and complexity of the underwater world they called home. And as the years passed, the city became a symbol of hope for a world struggling with the devastating effects of climate change. It showed that despite all difficulties, people could come together to create a better world. It is a reminder that the future is not set in stone, and that we can build it sustainably and in harmony with the natural world.
You've probably heard about the mysterious sea state of Atlantis. It was a high-tech utopia where people lived happily, but then something happened, and Atlantis disappeared from the face of the earth. Many people believe that this city lies at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. But what if we've been looking in the wrong place all this time? What if it's somewhere different from where they're trying to find it? What if all this time Atlantis was in the middle of the Sahara Desert? Well, this unexpected theory has some evidence, but to study this version, you first need to understand what Atlantis was and how we got to know about it. The very first mention of the mysterious city was in 360 BCE. Ancient philosopher Plato wrote about Atlantis. His work, Dialogues, described Atlantis as a rich land with advanced technologies. Its inhabitants were powerful, intelligent, and beautiful, like superhumans. He described in detail the structure of the city, and this was the main reason why many people believed in the existence of Atlantis. According to his records, the Atlanteans built this place in several concentric circles of black and red stone. Then they covered these circles with brass, tin, and precious metals. In the city, there were water channels on which ships sailed. The Atlanteans were sailors, so they built a passage from their city to the open sea. On the internet, you can find many drawings of Atlantis, created based on Plato's descriptions. Take a look at these drawings and an actual photo of the Eye of the Sahara. This place in the Sahara has a shape of several concentric circles. It looks as if a destroyed city left a trace on the sand. Many people have written online that the lost city was located there, but no one could prove it. Once upon a time, the Sahara was filled with rivers and lakes. In prehistoric times, there was only water there. So far, everything matches. The Eye of the Sahara was first discovered in the 1930s. This place was considered a crater from a fallen meteorite. But in the middle of the 20th century, scientists conducted a soil analysis and refuted the version with a fallen space rock. In the end, everyone agreed that this was a dome of molten rocks under which magma was raging. For millions of years, wind and water had been destroying the formed landscape and eventually made it look like perfect circles. But what if the Atlanteans once came to this place and used natural circles to build a city? In this case, we would have many traces and artifacts from this developed civilization. And yes, archaeologists did find some arrowheads, spears, oars, and other things there. But this has nothing to do with Atlantis. In the Eye of the Sahara, a multitude of Acheulean artifacts lies. It was an ancient tribe that frequented this place. For the first time, Acheulean tools appeared more than 1.5 million years ago. Some of the items found there may be 130,000 years old, and according to the records, Atlantis existed about 12,000 years ago. Archaeologists found no artificial structures in this place. There was also no debris or traces of a large city. People would have found some stuff if a big city with advanced technologies had existed here. The main supporter of this idea was one YouTube channel. It collected 1 million views and attracted the attention of many historians and anthropologists. The theory that the Eye of the Sahara is Atlantis was quickly refuted. People found too many discrepancies between this place and the description of Atlantis. The author tried to catch the viewer's attention by presenting external similarities between the natural landscape and the fictional ancient city. Another popular theory claims that Atlantis was a real continent located off the Bahamas, but then this city was swallowed up by the Bermuda Triangle. According to this legend, the city ruins still lie at the bottom of the triangle, but there's no confirmation of this theory either. Writer Charles Berlitz invented it. Adherents of this theory claim that the walls and streets in the western part of the Bahamas might be the ruins of Atlantis. But scientists disagree. They have proven that these walls are natural formations of coastal rocks. There are also rumors that the story of Atlantis was inspired by an actual historical catastrophe, the Black Sea Flood. This is the Bosporus, a strait in Turkey connecting the Black Sea and the Sea of Marmara. Around 5600 BCE, the Black Sea was twice as small as it is now and had many cities on its shores. Unfortunately, a huge flood destroyed this flourishing civilization. Within a year, cities descended underwater, and surviving inhabitants moved to foreign lands and spread stories about the flood. Maybe these stories inspired Plato to come up with Atlantis. In the 1950s, people came up with another version. Atlantis was the continent that is now Antarctica. Tens of thousands of years ago, a warm continent with a developed city shifted to the northern part of our planet because of the movement of Earth's crust. The Atlanteans couldn't adapt to the cold conditions, and Atlantis was covered with a thick layer of ice. This theory was refuted when scientists began studying the tectonic plate's nature. It turned out that Earth's crust couldn't have moved such a huge continent as Antarctica. The tectonic plates don't behave this way at all. But the main question is, was Atlantis real? No one had described it before Plato. Perhaps the philosopher came up with it. Maybe he did this to emphasize the correctness of his views on life and to identify his philosophical theories. In his works, he wrote a lot about divine and human nature and how people can destroy this nature. He spoke of decaying ideal societies because of immoral behavior and vices. The Atlanteans were once moral, spiritual people who created a utopia, but then they became greedy and mean. They destroyed their inner nature, and for this, they had to witness the destruction of their city. One night, fires and earthquakes hit Atlantis and plunged the city into the sea. The higher powers punished people for their immoral behavior, and Plato also wanted everyone to be afraid of moral decay. But judging by the descriptions of the earthquakes and fire, it may seem that Atlantis was destroyed by a volcanic eruption, as it was with the ancient Roman city of Pompeii. And such destructions have happened pretty often throughout history. Natural disasters ruined many developed cities. One of the most famous cases occurred in 1100 BCE in the Mediterranean Sea, when a volcanic eruption destroyed the highly developed Minoan society. The Minoan society existed for about 2,000 years. These people mostly lived on the islands of Crete and Santorini, located north of Crete. The Minoans had beautiful houses, a sewage system, and a developed economy. They were engaged in agriculture, grew fruits and vegetables, painted frescoes, and made jewelry. They were the first people to found the thalassocracy, an empire based on the sea. They lived off of fishing, piracy, and maritime trade. At the time, they performed cruel rituals, and their way of life was far from moral. They were used to earthquakes on the island of Santorini, so they reinforced the walls of the city with wooden beams, but they didn't know what a volcanic eruption was. And when the sulfur smell appeared in the air, they didn't suspect the impending catastrophe. When the volcano spilled out tons of lava and ash, all the residents of Santorini abandoned their homes and tried to escape, but they couldn't. The eruption and earthquake triggered a tsunami. A large wave flooded the coastal part of the island of Crete. This hit the economy of the Minoans hard and destroyed their port harbor. Then, foreigners attacked Crete and finally destroyed the developed civilization. Some historians think that Plato could have referred to the Minoan Empire when describing Atlantis. Using their example, he showed how immoral actions could destroy people.
Question for you. Do you think Atlantis could be real? It remains as one of history's greatest mysteries. The legend began with Plato, all the way back in ancient Greece. The tale of a civilization that formed and prospered before our own. Atlantis was supposedly a highly technological society, much like the Mayans. But, as the legend says, due to the people's greed, they were punished by a flood that destroyed and submerged their cities. Different theories try to guess Atlantis' location. Some say it was in the Mediterranean Sea. Some say it's beneath the Bermuda Triangle. But, as science has shown us, Atlantis may be only an allegory for humankind. Today, you'll discover several amazing underwater cities that you have never heard of. They existed indeed and are not just a myth. We're taking you on an excursion to the underwater city of Baia, which is on the coast of Italy. Known as the Las Vegas of the Roman Empire, Baia was a resort city. The Roman elite traveled there for recreation. Imagine an open-air spa. That was Baia. You can visit the submerged town by scuba diving and get close to that perfectly preserved, magnificent Roman sculpture, a true underwater wonder. You can spot the crumbled temples and buildings through glass-bottom boats. This is a moss-covered museum in Claudio's Nymphaeum. To your left, you can see a collection of classical Greek statues. Swimming down the Via Herculeana, you'll arrive at Villa Aprotio. Villas are Italian-style houses, and here you can admire their original marble floors. Notice the black and white patterns and the astounding shapes they make. Next, you'll arrive at Portus Julius. Can you see the collapsing wall structures at the bottom of the seafloor? You'll see well-preserved columns and limestone floors. Behold the ruins of the thermal baths of Lacus. The remaining multicolored mosaics are something great to see. You'll see their orange, blue, and green tiles if you get close enough. At Pisoni's Villa Pila, you'll see 25 preserved Roman pillars. Notice the arches, the frescoes nearby, and the magnitude of this well-kept treasure. The city was located over natural volcanic vents, so there were hot springs to be used at will. People went there looking to have an excellent time. And when I say people, I mean some of the great Roman emperors we learn about in school: Nero, Cicero, Caesar. But around the 8th century, the city was sacked and the luxurious town was abandoned. Slowly, the water level rose and the city started to drown. You are on a summer vacation off the coast of Greece, 4 hours outside of Athens, in the Peloponnese Peninsula on Pavlo-Petri. You dust off your snorkel and head for a free dive on a bright sunny day. Sometime into the dive, you start noticing patterns on the seabed. 13 feet below the surface, the outline of familiar objects starts to appear, one by one. As you continue swimming, what looks like the outline of an entire city emerges before your eyes. You wonder, how could water have taken the whole city? Rocks are perfectly aligned into what appears to be the foundation of a building. Nicholas Fleming, a British oceanographer on vacation in Greece, was the person that discovered Pavlo-Petri. He was documenting the seafloor artifacts. The team found the site filled with pots, storage vessels, and tools. A quern stone, for instance, is a tool used for grinding grains and turning them into flour. Multiple amphoras, which were found then, indicate that this settlement dated back to the Bronze Age, 5,500 years ago, when people started living in towns. The settlement is believed to have lasted for over 2,400 years. Pavlo-Petri is considered today the oldest submerged town yet found, and it's impressive that it wasn't a simple village. It was a vibrant port city with stone-built buildings, a marketplace, streets, and even squares. Let's continue our exploration and find secrets in other underwater cities. You are diving off the coast of the Ryukyu Islands. Pacific waters are far from smooth. There's a strong current pulling you into the deep sea. Suddenly, you see a huge structure thanks to the sunlight shining down on the seabed. At first, it looks like Machu Picchu's ruins across the globe in Peru. As you approach it, you slowly figure out its form. A pyramid-shaped structure, arches, staircases. It's something that could have easily been a palace or castle. Could this also be a sign of human activity? What you just saw is known today as the Yonaguni Monument. It also goes by the name of Japan's Atlantis. The entire monument is about the size of 5 football fields and the height of a 5-story building. Its most surprising feature is its expansive terraces that host large crowd gatherings. Explorers and scientists believe that Yonaguni dates back to 10,000 years ago. But whether it is a man-made structure or a natural formation is still under debate. For Japan's top marine geologist, Professor Masaki Kimura, Yonaguni is the heritage of a lost civilization. Kimura has dived into exploring the ruins over 100 times over the past 10 years. According to him, there are clear signs of human activity down there. The Triangle Pool, located on the monument's surface, is a triangle-shaped concave that is a historical symbol of water fountains in the region. There is also a giant turtle carved on the eastern side of the structure. And according to Kimura, turtles have an important cultural meaning. Several pieces of stone tools have been recovered from the site. Their estimated age dates back to 10,000 years ago. However, not all scientists are convinced of the same. For many, Yonaguni is the result of thousands of years of erosion. The fact that the monument is composed of one massive rock leads them to believe that it is not human-made. The defined edges and flat surfaces resemble a natural formation occurrence in Northern Ireland, known as Giant's Causeway. A series of interlocking basalt columns look like the ruins of a palace, but they were the result of volcanic activity in the region. Well, stay tuned for more underwater discoveries. The next stop on our voyage is one of today's most famous underwater cities that has turned into an underwater archaeological park. The city of Port Royal in Jamaica exists today only below the surface. But in 1692, it was one of the wealthiest cities in the Western Hemisphere. Port Royal was the center of the British Empire at the time, and an important trade city that attracted people from all over. It was also home to real-life pirates of the Caribbean. On the morning of June 7, 1692, the people of Port Royal met a different fate than they probably expected. The bars and restaurants beaming with life woke up shaking. People were taken out of bed with the power of a massive earthquake, estimated today at 7.5 on the Richter scale. One survivor says he saw the earth opening up and swallowing the town whole. What he said could be true, as the city was mainly built over sand. The ground sucked buildings, roads, and everyone above. Geysers erupted, and finally, waves as big as 10-story-high buildings hit the city. About 33 acres of the city disappeared underwater, and amazingly, most of its 17th century remains lie in good condition under 40 feet of water. In the ruins, archaeologists have found taverns, storage rooms, kitchens, and recreational buildings used for diverse purposes. You can see a grand lion statue, a submerged bridge, and many picturesque arches. Now, do you fancy a trip to India? Just outside its coast lies another sunken marvel. A site known as the Lost City of Cambay is located on the Gulf of a similar name. It remained hidden until 2001, when the National Institute of Ocean Technology did a routine water assessment. With sonar technology, which sends a wave of sound to the bottom of the sea, they found something far beneath the surface. Images showed well-defined geometric shapes spread along a 5-mile stretch. The remains found dated to more than 9,500 years ago, meaning that this civilization was lost at around the end of the Ice Age. Debris recovered from the site included construction material, pottery, beads, sculptures, and even bones. Scientists argue whether these artifacts are indeed from the site, but if they truly are, then the lost city of Cambay would be the oldest civilization in the world. Do you know how many continents there are on Earth? That's an easy one, 7. But wait a second. Aren't Europe and Asia one large continent, Eurasia? It looks so when you look at the world map. Well, scientists think differently. They don't just look at bodies of land sticking out of the sea. Geoscientists study the types of rock that continents are made from. When you see the world from their perspective, the number of continents actually increases. Yes, they are not a myth. lost continents exist, or at least they used to. They are hiding under other landmasses. Peekaboo! Researchers have recently discovered one continent just like that. It's called Greater Adria. Sound familiar? Yes, it has something to do with the Adriatic Sea. This lost continent is completely buried under Europe. It collided with Europe and started to sink under it a long time ago. Today, it lies beneath Italy, Greece, and the Baltics. Its size and even shape match that of Greenland, the world's largest island. But how did geoscientists find Greater Adria? It's no longer visible, but it left some clues. Parts of it were embedded in the Alps. Other chunks were incorporated into present-day Italy and Croatia, on the other side of the Adriatic Sea. Limestone rocks from the former continent started to change once they were under the European landmass. Tremendous heat and pressure spread over tens of millions of years changed their structure. Out goes the limestone, in comes the marble. All the Greek and Roman temples you admired on your summer vacation were constructed using this marble. It was sort of a going-away gift from a long-lost continent. Greater Adria camouflaged itself well for thousands of years, but other lost continents were hiding in plain sight. Have you heard of Earth's eighth continent, Zealandia? Probably not, because it sits under the surface of the Pacific Ocean. 95% of Zealandia is now underwater. Can you guess where exactly? Its name is a good hint – under New Zealand. If you open Google Maps, you can see its outline. Look for a lighter shade of blue in the ocean. It should stretch from New Caledonia to New Zealand. This bump in the ocean floor used to be above sea level. It was about 2/3 of Australia and more than twice the landmass of Greater Adria in size. We can spot Zealandia today because it hasn't sunk too low, and that's the best way to discover other lost continents. Imagine the Earth without the oceans. The bottom of the sea isn't flat. There are mountains and trenches. You could put Mount Everest in the deepest of them, and there would still be 7,000 feet between it and sea level. This trench got so deep because of a geological process called subduction. The Pacific Plate got under the Philippine Plate. Earth's crust is made out of those plates that float in a sea of molten rock. Then they bump into each other, one goes down while the other one rises. That's how Greater Adria ended up under the European continent. Our planet is constantly on the go. We don't notice this process because it happens deep beneath our feet. 120 million years ago, Australia and Antarctica were a single piece of land. Yep, the coldest and one of the hottest places on Earth were once the same territory. Antarctica said goodbye to Australia, but it didn't leave empty-handed. Today, there is an oceanic plateau in the Indian Ocean. The word plateau comes from French, and it means elevated flatland. And the name of this land sounds like the title of a Hollywood movie, Broken Ridge. Long ago, it was connected to another lost continent. Scientists believe that it made a land bridge between India and Antarctica. What was this land like? The answer possibly lies in a tiny archipelago in the southern Indian Ocean. These islands are all that is left of an ancient landmass. They have a cold climate. The islands feature glaciers because they're so close to Antarctica. But in the past, the climate must have been temperate with plenty of rainfall. The animals and plants would have been similar to those that we find in tropical regions today. The lost continent's landscape probably resembled that of New Zealand. Now, while we're in the area, can you guess which continent the island state of Madagascar once belonged to? If you guessed Africa, sorry, you were wrong. Hey, don't feel bad. Look up and to the right of the map. The correct answer is India. Some 120 million years ago, I wasn't around then, India separated from the African continent and went northeast. Madagascar wasn't quick enough and ended up as an island off the southeast coast of Africa. But there is evidence of an even greater landmass, the lost continent of Mauritius. Scientists found traces of the ancient landmass under the island of Mauritius. Today, it's a tourist hotspot, but millions of years ago, it was a real hotspot, volcanoes and all. That's how scientists were able to retrace the steps of Mauritius. They found a mineral that exists in rocks which lava spews out after an eruption. The long-lost land once covered the area from Mauritius to the west coast of India. Imagine if that land existed today. It would form a great mix of Indian and African cultures. The local dishes would definitely be spicy. Now, speaking of spicy, have you had Indonesian food recently? Just 50,000 years ago, Southeast Asia looked much different. There was no Sumatra, Borneo, Java, or even Australia. Just Sunda and Saul, two continental masses that were divided by a deep water trench. You had the extension of mainland Southeast Asia on one side and the greater Australia on the other. Back then, Bali stood at the southernmost tip of Asia. Biologists were among the first scientists to notice the split. Species developed differently on Sunda and Sahul. That's why Australia has unique animals, such as the kangaroo, wombat, and platypus. And did you know that a giant kangaroo once roamed the island of New Guinea? That's because, up until the end of the last age, there was a land bridge to Australia. Today, the two islands are separated by the Torres Strait, but it's quite shallow, less than 65 feet. It's a reminder that this was once a single landmass called Saul. Another ocean strait that isn't too deep separates Asia from North America. The Bering Strait sits today in the place of Beringia. This ancient landmass wasn't that big. It stretched 1,000 miles from north to south. That's just a third of the driving distance from Los Angeles to New York. Beringia was important for another reason. During the Ice Ages, it connected the whole world. Water levels were 300 feet lower than they are today. If they went even lower, you could walk from the Cape of Good Hope in Africa all the way to Cape Horn in South America. Talk about the ultimate backpacking route. Today, you can hop on an airplane and fly to pretty much any place on the globe. The world has never seemed smaller, has it? Well, it has. Some 300 to 200 million years ago, we were all one world, literally. Pangaea was a supercontinent that included all of the continents. Its name is in Greek, and it simply means all Earth. But Pangaea started to crack up. The biggest gap formed between the Americas on one side and Europe and Africa on the other. Seawater soon started pouring in, and that's how we got the Atlantic Ocean. This process is by no means over. While you are watching this video, North America is drifting further and further away from Europe at the rate of 1 inch per year. Doesn't seem much when compared to the average human lifespan, but in the end, all the continents will reconnect with each other, forming a supercontinent. And it wouldn't be the first time in Earth history that this happens. Honestly, I'm not going to wait around for that.
It was April 10th, 1912. Richard had just departed from Southampton, England, aboard the most famous ship of the time, dubbed the Unsinkable. Since he had just witnessed a near collision with the SS City of New York, he decided to write to his wife and report the unfortunate and frightening event. "My dearest Sal," he wrote, "we got away yesterday after a lot of trouble." Little did he know that a mere 4 days later, both his pen and the ship he was on would be lost forever at the bottom of the North Atlantic Ocean. Was this some sort of bad omen? Did Richard actually foresee what was about to happen to the ship he was on? In case you haven't figured it out by now, Mr. Richard Geddes was aboard the Titanic on the day that he wrote the letter to his wife. On April 14th, 1912, the ship seemed to have been lost forever. Along with it, so many secrets and treasures have settled at the bottom of the ocean. It took until 1985 for the Titanic's wreck to be finally rediscovered using state-of-the-art sonar technology. Ever since then, they've managed to recover thousands of items from the Titanic, and many of them went on display or auction. Things like jewelry, a life jacket, a menu from the ship's restaurant, or even a sample square of carpet from the first-class stateroom have all captivated the public's attention, just like the many stories of the people on board. Scientists have even tried to come up with strategies to get the Titanic back up altogether to properly study it and stop it from getting more and more damaged at the bottom of the ocean. Some have suggested filling the wreck with ping pong balls to make it float, while others even considered injecting it with 180,000 tons of Vaseline. Another idea was to use 450,000 tons of liquid nitrogen to trap it in an iceberg that would float to the surface. But they eventually had to let go of all these potential strategies since the Titanic is way too fragile to ever be recovered. The Titanic may be one of the most interesting ships lying at the bottom of the ocean, at least in popular culture, but deep-sea divers have a lot of other stories to share. Planes also sometimes find their way to the bottom of the ocean. Deep-sea divers in Oahu, Hawaii, came across the wreckage of an F-4U Corsair plane. It seems to have crashed into the ocean in 1946, as it didn't have sufficient fuel. If you can dive deep enough, you might even stumble upon statues and lost artifacts, like those found in the world's only underwater archaeological park off the coast of Naples, Italy. It features the ruins of the ancient Roman city of Baia. The underwater statues found here are breathtaking, to say the least. In an ironic twist of events, some of the equipment we intended to use to get us to the moon was lost at the bottom of the sea for a very long time. But how did that happen? Beginning from the late 1960s and ending in the early 70s, many Apollo rockets were launched to orbit the Earth and the Moon. When reaching altitudes of about 38 miles, the first portion of the spacecraft, including the engines, needed to separate. People thought these components got destroyed or lost forever. But were they really? In 2012, a team of specialists discovered a bunch of rocket engines 14,000 feet off the coast of Florida. They have since gone through a 2-year renovation plan and are now on display at Seattle's Museum of Flight. Can you imagine stumbling upon a whole city underwater? Back in 2001, a lost city was discovered in the Gulf of Cambay, off the coast of India. Some archaeologists believe it to be the oldest city in history. By comparison, it's almost the size of Manhattan and features massive walls and even plazas. They stumbled upon pieces of sculpture, artwork, and even what looked like ancient wooden furniture, believed to date back up to 9,500 years ago and 5,000 years older than any city previously discovered. Okay, how about an underwater river? I can't even imagine what that would look like, but some deep divers claim to have seen it south of Tulum, Mexico. Is that even possible? Well, not really, since the Cenote Angelita Cave is not a true river, but a very special type of optical illusion. It's formed by a halocline, meaning a cloud of hydrogen sulfide at the bottom of this underwater cave. Turns out you can actually swim right through this cloud, which makes you feel like you're swimming through a flowing body of water. Not all things discovered underwater are inanimate objects. Some of them are actually quite scary sea creatures. A jellyfish might not be on your list of things to look out for if you can avoid the stings. But this giant one, also known as a lion's mane jellyfish, is the largest known species of its kind. In all fairness, you'll only uncover it if you happen to dive into the waters of the Arctic, Northern Atlantic, and Northern Pacific Oceans. You surely won't miss it, since it stretches across 120 feet from the top to the bottom of its tentacles. When it comes to deep-sea diving, a lot of people are looking to discover some lost treasure. One diver was lucky enough to have hit the literal jackpot when he came upon nearly $1 million worth of treasure on the bottom of the seabed. That was back in 2015, when this lucky diver was swimming just off the coast of Florida. What did he find, you might ask? Well, about 51 gold coins, 40 feet of gold chain, and a rare single coin that was tailored for the King of Spain, Philip V. Speaking of people looking for lost treasures, divers also sometimes found pirate ships. They discovered one of these pirate shipwrecks in 2015 off the coast of Colombia. It dates back to the 18th century. The value of this forgotten ship was estimated to be between $4 billion and $17 billion, as it contained treasures, precious stones, gold, and countless other really valuable items. By comparison, a whole island in the Bahamas is up for grabs at $75 million. A computer is the last thing you'd ever expect to discover underwater, right? And this was no regular computer, but an ancient one. And yet, someone stumbled upon it between 1900 and 1901 on the spot of a shipwreck located off one Greek island. Researchers believe this weird stone contraption to be the earliest form of a computer. It was designed to serve many purposes, such as predicting astronomical positions and eclipses on the calendar. Since humanity lost most of the technology used back then, it was wonderful to rediscover it so many years later. It let us piece together many of the ancient Greeks' accomplishments. The computer is now at the National Archaeological Museum of Athens, should you ever want to check it out in person. This has to be one of the most mysterious places on Earth. It's called the Mariana Trench, and it's the deepest part of the Earth's oceans. We really don't know how deep it is, since it's so difficult to measure, but it's somewhere around 7 miles deep and 5 times longer than the Grand Canyon. They first studied this massive underwater hole back in 1875 using a weighted rope. Back in 2012, a Canadian film director named James Cameron reached the bottom of the trench in the submersible vessel Deep Sea Challenger. Some of the most bizarre creatures on the planet call this place their home, including the Dumbo octopus, the sea cucumber, and the goblin shark. The Mariana Trench took its name after the nearby Mariana Islands, which are named Las Marianas in honor of the Spanish Queen Mariana of Austria.
There once was a kingdom where the ancient Egyptians traveled to buy gifts for pharaohs, sort of like an ancient shopping mall. This kingdom, named the Land of Punt, was rich in luxury goods, including gold, aromatic resins, blackwood, ebony, ivory, and exotic animals like leopards and baboons. All of these sound like great gift ideas to me. The Land of Punt was an especially important trading partner for Egypt for over 1,000 years. But if you plan to go there, the bad news is that it hasn't survived to these days, and nobody knows for sure exactly where Punt was located. We only know about it from records. The most famous of them were left on the walls of the temple of Queen Hatshepsut, who had sent an expedition to Punt. Scientists have been trying to find the exact location of this rich land for over 150 years. It could have been southeast of Egypt, in a coastal region south of it along the Red Sea, Gulf of Aden, and the Indian Ocean, or it could have covered the Horn of Africa and the area across the sea in southern Arabia. Now researchers were finally able to narrow down the possible locations thanks to a study of baboon mummies. Ancient Egyptians admired baboons and even thought they were related to the deity of the moon and wisdom. One species, the sacred baboon, was often shown in wall paintings, sitting with its tail curled to the right, and was mummified in this position. Another type, the olive baboon, was wrapped up in one giant cocoon. Both types were found in the tombs of the Valley of the Kings. But if you remember geography lessons, baboons just don't wander around Egypt, so they must have been brought there through trade with other regions. Primatologists, Egyptologists, geographers, and geochemists look at the mummified baboons from 2 different time periods in ancient Egypt. Some were from the New Kingdom period, and others were from the Ptolemaic period. The scientists did some more hard work and analyzed tissues from 155 baboons from 75 separate places in eastern Africa and southern Arabia. Those were all areas that they thought could be the ancient Land of Punt. They measured oxygen and strontium in the baboons' bodies. When animals drink water and eat plants, their teeth, hair, and bones show a geographic signature of where they've lived, thanks to these elements they contain. Scientists use a special method called isotopic mapping, and found out that the New Kingdom baboons they analyzed came from a location in Eritrea, Ethiopia, or Somalia. 5 mummified baboons from the Ptolemaic period had strontium levels that matched those found in Egypt. So ancient Egyptians might have had a special place to breed and keep baboons, probably in Memphis, a city in Lower Egypt, not Tennessee. Meanwhile, paleontologists from New Zealand got lucky, as some boulders had split open from the tide and revealed fossils of the largest penguin that has ever lived on Earth. The scientists used laser scanners to make 3D models of the ancient penguin bones. They compared these bones to the flipper size of modern penguins and did some math as to how much the old penguins might have weighed. Today, the biggest penguins, emperor penguins, weigh between 55 to 100 pounds. Researchers think that the penguins from the past that they found weighed around 340 pounds, real giants in the penguin world. These huge flightless birds lived in the oceans around New Zealand more than 50 million years ago, after the dinosaurs went extinct. They totally took advantage of their big bodies to stay warm in the cold water. They might have even traveled the world thanks to it. And they'd scare off any predators, but they didn't have any. The asteroid that took down the dinosaurs also got rid of most big marine reptiles, and the ancestors of seals and whales were still living on land. Back in 1992, 4 farmers in China were draining water from their ponds and accidentally bumped into a ship full of gold and ancient statues worth millions. Just kidding, they actually found the Longgu Caves. Those are 24 big caves created by people a long, long time ago. Even though they are so large and well-made, no one knows who built them, why they were built, or how they were built. Experts think the caves are at least 2,000 years old, but they don't understand why these caves aren't mentioned in any historical records. All of the Longyu caverns look the same and aren't connected to each other. Each cave has one entrance connected to a vertical shaft with a carved staircase. Rain and water from the surface can flow into the caves through these stairs. To manage this water, the caves have special grooves, channels, and a system to catch the water at the bottom. So it looks like the ancient builders were real pros when it came to drainage and water management. Maybe my town could learn a lesson from them, as it turns into Venice after every heavy shower. Anyway, the caverns were built below a hill, named after a bird that is one of the most respected creatures in Chinese mythology and culture. It symbolizes all the best things, like high virtue, grace, and the union of yin and yang. Scientists think there could be a connection between the caverns and the bird, but it's just a theory so far. Experts from the National Institute of Ocean Technology in India were doing their routine pollution surveys when they found some structures that looked like a city underwater. Using special sonar technology, the team found big geometric shapes on the ocean floor. They brought up different items from the site, like pottery, beads, sculptures, parts of walls, and even human bones and teeth. They thought the ruins belonged to a civilization older than the Bronze Age Indus Valley Civilization, which is the earliest urban culture of the Indian subcontinent that we know of so far. But not everyone joined in on celebrating this awesome discovery. Some archaeologists refused to believe it and thought it could be some computer tricks. And even when they saw hundreds of artifacts from the ocean floor, they said an ancient river could have brought them there from someplace else. The team that discovered the underwater site decided to prove they were right. They chose a piece of wood as their main evidence. They tested it and found it was 9,500 years old. That could be the age of the entire site. Skeptics still insist that we can't rewrite all human history because of one piece of wood. Even 23 years since the discovery, no one is sure about the final answer. This is partly because it's hard to explore the site. It's in extremely dangerous waters with strong currents and riptides. During the cool Antarctica's summer, from late November through January, geologists from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee climbed the frozen slopes of the McIntyre Promontory in the Transantarctic Mountains. High above the ice fields, they looked through the mountain's gray rocks for fossils from when the continent had green forests. By the end of their trip, the geologists found fossil pieces from 13 trees. These fossils show that the trees are over 260 million years old. This means the forest grew at the end of the Permian period before the first dinosaurs even appeared. More than 90% of all species on Earth disappeared back then, including the polar forests. These trees would have been very tough if they grew in Antarctica and could have survived. But a huge increase in gases like carbon dioxide and methane must have taken them down. This Antarctic forest is a terrific way for us to see what life was like before the extinction, and we might even understand what caused it. It also shows us how plants were different back then from those we are used to now. There's a mysterious island that appears and disappears like magic. Just like Schrödinger's cat, this Schrödinger's island exists and doesn't exist at the same time. Officially it's called Sandy Island, and it once appeared in maps, but it was never there in real life. Australian scientists decided to solve the mystery once and for all by embarking on an adventure to find this elusive archipelago. But when they reached the coordinates, all they found was endless blue waves. It's like the island was playing a game of hide and seek with them. This story goes back to 1876. A whaling ship was crossing the area and reported an island. Whoever saw it said it was over 15 miles long north to south and around 3 miles wide, about the size of Manhattan, so not so tiny at all. But every time researchers went to visit the area, they found nothing. So in 1974, an official mission from New Caledonia declared that Sandy Island was simply not a thing and excluded it from all maps. People went on with their lives until they noticed that the island was appearing on Google Earth as a black blob. In 2012, another Australian expedition went out to check out the area to get some explanations. They had to write a eulogy for the long-lost island and explain what could have created this mess. For starters, mapping technology wasn't at its peak back in the 1900s. It was easy to get the coordinates wrong. Then there was the fact that the area is big on volcanic activities. It's likely that volcanic lava cooled down and created a raft of some kind. Let's say that the whaling ship went by, saw the volcanic raft, and thought it was land from a distance. But hey, it's just a guess. Humans have ventured far and wide across the globe, and it may have seemed at some point that we discovered each and every nook of our planet. But when Mount Lico popped up on Google Earth, scientists were overcome with excitement. This hidden gem in northern Mozambique is no ordinary rainforest. It's nestled inside a volcano. Determined to confirm the existence of this mysterious forest, experts assembled a team of top-notch scientists and specialists from around the world. The journey to Mount Lico was no walk in the park, with a daunting vertical rock climb standing between them and the forest. But after 6 years of planning and preparation, they were ready for the challenge. Once they got there, they saw it was even better than they imagined. The place was like a perfectly tended garden. The forest sounded unique and different from other rainforests. There were some insanely huge caterpillars that looked dangerous. And they even found ancient pots and evidence of an untouched human ecosystem. Ooh. Terra incognita means unknown land. And one of the largest unknown territories being uncovered today is the land beneath Antarctica's ice sheets. Below the snowy surface, there is an entirely new world of canyons, waterways, and lakes, which are now being mapped. One can't help but wonder, is there really liquid water below Antarctica's frozen surface? Yep. Water can exist without freezing due to pressure. The liquid water is the result of Earth's warm interior, and that's how we get things such as Lake Vostok. Now, you can't see it, but Lake Vostok is right here. Located in East Antarctica, it lies beneath 2.5 miles of thick ice. This huge lake is about 4,800 square miles. Humans could only discover it with the help of some top-notch technologies like seismic soundings and ice-penetrating radars. According to these scientists, it's likely that the lake has been there for up to 15 million years. Bhutan is on the map for, among other things, being the happiest country in all of Asia. But it kept a hidden gem for all these years, one of the world's tallest unclimbed mountains, Kunkar Pansum. Bhutan is enmeshed in the glorious Himalayan mountains. That's why the climbing community was beyond excited when they discovered an untouched mountain. Imagine being the first person to climb an unexplored peak. That would probably guarantee you a spot in the Guinness World Records for sure. The mountain has been untouched because of a Bhutanese law. For locals, the mountain peak is a sacred site, shrouded in mystery and legends. One of their beliefs is that the sacredness of climbing a mountain lies not in reaching its peak, but in truly communing with the mountain and enjoying the process. We got to admit, that is a bit of a newsflash for Westerners. If you're ever in the state of New York, make sure you check out the Aglo General Store. You'll have to drive somewhere around the Catskills to find a beautiful, grand, big nothing. Aglo is one of America's most famous paper towns, aka a fake town. But this case is different from Sandy Island. Aglo Town never existed, and it wasn't a mistake. You see, there's an old copyright practice amongst map makers. They add in paper towns so they can know when someone is simply copy-pasting their work. What they didn't expect is that this would get completely out of hand. Some say that one day a guy picked up a map at a gas station that had Aglo Town marked in it. The person decided to open a store over there and named it Aglo General Store. Some say the guy who opened the store faced a lawsuit from the map makers. Anyways, it only lasted enough years to become a national joke. Americans drove from all over the U.S. to get a picture of the town's fake welcome sign. And then we've got Bermeja Island, located in the Gulf of Mexico. This funky island appeared on many maps of the 16th and 17th centuries. It was probably drawn by Spanish explorers. Sure, the exact location varied from map to map, and its name sometimes appeared as Vermeja, but its existence was certain enough. The Bermeja Island was last seen in a 1921 Mexican map, and then, poof, it dropped out of the horizon altogether. People started talking and wondering, did the island sink? Was it destroyed? In 2009, 3 official investigations happened to search for the island. They used high-tech technologies to scour the Mexican seabed, but Bermeja was nowhere. Researchers had multiple guesses on what it could be. Let's delve on one of these ideas. The idea was probably made up by old-day explorers to mislead their enemies in search of land and gold. Well, that seems plausible. Now, let's take a look at Rio de Janeiro. Once, the city was filled with informal territories. These places are known as slums or favelas. They're like mini-cities inside the big city. Some favelas are known to be underprivileged territories, where dwellers don't get the same urban perks as other citizens, such as the sewage system and garbage pickups. These slums grew so quickly that the government didn't have time to keep track of their developments. So today, it's usually the dwellers themselves that name the streets and make do with whatever they have at their disposal. One of the biggest slums in Brazil is located in Rio de Janeiro, the so-called Hacienda, and it was only recognized as a neighborhood by the local government in the 1990s. Our own ocean floor is less mapped than Venus, Mars, and the Moon. In fact, 95% of our oceans are unexplored. Strange, right? We do have the available technology, which is mainly sonar soundings, sending wave sounds to the ocean bed and registering what they hear back. One of the main advantages of mapping the seabed more thoroughly would be to get more insight to marine hazards such as earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanic eruptions. Plus, there are so many unidentified marine life. This could give us a great insight into preservation and discovering the true dynamics of our marine ecosystems.